Every road trip starts with a plan. Miles, playlists, gas stops. But Arizona has a way of adding something you never scheduled. That one moment where the lights of the highway don't feel friendly anymore, and the space between towns suddenly feels wrong in your bones. Tonight, you're not just listening to stories. You're riding shotgun through 10 stretches of desert asphalt, where people still check their mirrors years later. US 93, I-40, Route 66, the back roads near Wickenburg, Flagstaff, Kingman, Canyon Diablo, and the Sonoran Dark that doesn't care how brave you think you are. This is Verified Souls. If you're staying for the whole drive, prove it at the end. Drop the timestamp of the story that hit you hardest and tell whether it changed how you feel about driving these roads after dark. Because the way you answer might say more about what's sitting just outside your headlights than you realize. You ever notice how some stretches of highway feel heavy before you even know their names? Not because of the curves or the hills or the lack of lights, but because the air itself feels like it remembers something you don't. That's what US 93 did to me the first time I drove it at night, the part they call Blood Alley, north of Wickenburg, where the blacktop rolls through low desert, and the next town on the signs always feels a little too far away. Slide into the passenger seat with me for a bit. Imagine it's just you and me in the cab, dashboard glow on our faces, tires humming, the kind of silence that makes you keep checking the mirrors, even when there's no reason to. It was a February night, clear and cold enough that the stars looked fake, like someone had overexposed the sky. I was coming back from Vegas to Phoenix alone. A run I'd done a few times before, but this was the first time I hit that long, lonely section of 93 after midnight instead of during the day. If you've never been out there at that hour, you need to understand how empty it really is. No billboards, no real shoulder in some spots, just a narrow lane of light in front of you, and beyond that, miles of desert where you know help isn't coming quickly if anything goes wrong. I remember glancing at the fuel gauge, the clock, 12:47 a.m., and thinking, just don't break down here. That was the first stupid casual thought, the last normal one. About 20 minutes later, the radio crackled to life. Not music. I'd already killed that because the static was annoying. But a voice. Flat. Professional. The way dispatchers always sound when they're juggling 3 emergencies at once. Medic 1. Respond US 93 southbound, milepost 191, multi-vehicle collision, possible fatalities. It was so clear I actually looked for a radio I didn't have. I was in my own car, not an ambulance, no CB, no scanner, just the factory stereo and my phone on silent. The sound came through the speakers anyway, like it had been patched straight into them. I remember the exact wording because I spent months later trying to find that call in any news story and never could. Here's the thing. When you're alone that late on that kind of road and you hear multi-vehicle collision, possible fatalities, your brain does this weird double move. Part of you thinks, I should be seeing lights by now, flares, cruisers, something. The other part starts scanning the darkness ahead, bracing to come around a bend and find chaos blocking the lanes. I checked my odometer against the nearest mile marker. I was at 187, heading south. 4 miles to wherever that voice was talking about, if it was even now and not some weird bleed-through from earlier. You don't think in those words at the time, of course. At the time, you just lean forward over the wheel, grip a little tighter, and tell yourself to stay alert. The first sign something was wrong was the smell. If you've ever been near a bad wreck, you know it. Burnt rubber, hot metal, that sickly sweetness of coolant and oil that your brain registers as wrong, even if you don't know cars. The air in the car changed before I saw anything. 1 second it was cold desert air pumping through the vents. The next it was just heavier, like I'd driven into the breath of a garage that had been sealed up around a running engine. Then the beams picked up faint parallel lines on the asphalt ahead, long, dark arcs that could only be skid marks, fresh enough that they were still glossy in the light. "You're coming up on it," the dispatcher's voice said in my head, even though the speakers were silent now. I rolled off the gas, eased my foot to the brake, scanning for flashing lights. Nothing. No reflection of emergency strobes on the low hills. No oncoming headlights for miles in either direction. Just that smell getting thicker, and those black curves on the pavement multiplying like something had thrashed back and forth across both lanes. I remember saying, out loud, "Where are you?" It felt like the road was holding its breath. At milepost 191, my high beams finally picked up the outline of something on the shoulder. For a heartbeat, I thought it was a white SUV or a van turned partly sideways. Then the shape resolved into nothing but dust and low scrub. No cars, no glass, no debris. Just an empty stretch of desert shoulder and a whole lot of skid marks that ended at the dirt, as if the vehicles had all leapt up and vanished. The smell, though, that stayed. It got strong enough that my eyes watered. I could almost taste burned plastic. Here's where I need you to really be with me. Picture your hands on your own steering wheel, knuckles pale. You're doing maybe 45 now, crawling past where you're sure there should be twisted metal and flashing strobes and high-vis vests moving in your lights. Instead, there's only your car and that weird, invisible thickness in the air, and then, from somewhere behind you, you hear sirens. I checked the mirror, expecting to see the familiar blue and red wash of DPS units coming up fast. There was nothing. No approaching headlights, no shimmer on the horizon. Just the sound, rising and falling in Doppler waves, like it was already passing me and vanishing down the road ahead. It was wrong in a way I still can't describe properly, like someone was playing a recording of sirens in a tiled bathroom, and then piping it straight into my skull. The hair on my arms lifted. I flicked on my hazard lights without even realizing I'd done it. Medic 1, be advised, reports of ejection, severe trauma, bystanders on scene. The voice was back. Same tone, same cadence, like a tape rewinding and playing again from the top. I could hear other voices under it now, frantic, overlapping. The way people sound when they're trying to explain what they've seen, and the words keep tripping over each other. A woman sobbing, a man shouting something about, "They just pulled out, they just pulled out, I didn't see them." My hands started to shake so badly I had to clamp them on the wheel. There was no one on that road but me. I pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the middle of nowhere, and just sat there listening. The radio display was dead. No station, no track, no call coming through Bluetooth. My phone was in the cup holder, screen black. But the audio kept coming, as clear as if a dispatcher's rig were mounted in my dash. They were giving out intervals, ETA 21 minutes to first unit on scene. And that number punched me in the gut because I'd read somewhere that this highway had some of the worst emergency response times in the country. Out here, 21 minutes might as well be 2 hours. Out here, people can bleed out before the first siren ever reaches earshot. The smell finally broke me. It shifted from burned rubber and oil to something metallic and wet that my body recognized even before my mind did. I cracked the door to breathe, and it was stronger outside, hanging over the mile marker like an invisible cloud. The desert itself was silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just that smell and the low tick of my cooling engine. I stepped out onto the gravel, hazard lights washing the guardrail orange, and that's when the headlights appeared. They weren't coming up the road the normal way. They bloomed into existence about 50 yards ahead of me, already at an angle, already in the middle of a violent swerve, like I'd stumbled into the middle frame of a crash instead of the let-up. One set of lights jerked hard across the center line. Another flared as someone slammed on their brakes. For an instant, in that weird double exposure of my hazard strobes and their beams, I saw the ghost of two vehicles occupy the same space. Then everything went dark again. No impact, no sound. Just my hazards clicking and my own breath hammering in my ears. I don't remember getting back into the car. I do remember the way my hands felt on the steering wheel, like they belonged to someone else moving through mud. I pulled back onto the road and drove the rest of the way to Phoenix with the radio off and the windows cracked, trying to shake that smell out of my head. Every few miles, my eyes would flick to the mile markers, doing the math backward. How far am I from 191? How far away from whatever that was? The part that keeps me up isn't even the voices or the lights. It's what happened 3 days later, when I finally convinced myself I'd had some kind of waking dream and went looking for proof it wasn't. I dug through local news sites, DPS releases, anything about a crash on 93 around that time. I found one. Multi-vehicle, southbound lane near Wickenburg. 3 dead, several injured. It had happened the year before, almost to the day, at milepost 191. The article mentioned frantic 911 calls, long EMS wait times, bystanders trying to help, the timestamp on the first call, 12:47 a.m. So here's my question for you, sitting wherever you are, maybe with the lights off, maybe with this playing in your car on some long drive. What do you think I drove through that night? A stress-induced hallucination from reading too many horror articles about America's most dangerous highway. Some weird radio quirk replaying old dispatch traffic as I happened to pass the right spot. Or did that stretch of Blood Alley decide I needed to hear what it had already taken, needed to smell it, and see just enough of it that I'd never again mistake this road for empty desert? Because if you ever find yourself on US 93 after midnight, north of Wickenburg, and the air suddenly grows heavy at a random mile marker, if you catch the stink of hot metal when there's nothing in your headlights and hear sirens that don't belong to any car you can see, do me one favor. Keep your hands on the wheel. Keep your eyes on the road. And when a calm voice in your speakers starts giving you a call you shouldn't be getting, remember that somewhere out there, there's a piece of asphalt that is still replaying 21 of the longest minutes of some strangers' lives, over and over, to whoever is unlucky enough to pass through at the right or wrong time. You ever have a stretch of road that feels like it's watching you back? Not just creepy, not just lonely, but aware in a way that makes you keep glancing at the rear view, like the asphalt itself is waiting for you to slip. That's what Route 66 did to me, between Kingman and Winslow, the old alignments that run alongside I-40, the pieces that never got fully swallowed by the interstate. Tonight, scoot a little closer in your seat and stay with me because, for a few hours on that drive, I stopped feeling like a tourist on the Mother Road and started feeling like I'd been drafted into something it had been doing to people for almost 100 years. I was doing what a lot of people do, a romantic, half-planned road trip on historic 66 through Arizona, chasing neon and old motels instead of hammering straight across on the interstate. I'd left Kingman late because I spent too long taking pictures of those classic signs and an old gas station, and by the time I hit the stretch out toward Seligman and beyond, the sun was already gone, and the sky had gone that deep desert indigo that makes the stars look close. You know how every guidebook tells you Route 66 is charming, sleepy, full of history. They don't tell you what it feels like when all that history is behind dark windows, and you're the only set of headlights for miles. About an hour east of Kingman, I decided to get off I-40 and follow one of the older 2-lane alignments that parallels the highway for a while. The signs still call it Historic Route 66, but it feels narrower, closer to the ground, like it remembers every tread that's passed over it. Right away, I noticed something that didn't quite make sense. There were cars on the shoulder ahead, maybe 3 or 4 of them, all angled the same way, nose toward the road like they'd just pulled off. Their silhouettes were wrong, though, too boxy, too rounded, like somebody had dropped die-cast toys from different decades onto the same little strip of asphalt. As I rolled closer, my brights picked out more detail. The first one looked like a late 70s Oldsmobile, Big chrome bumper and square grille, dust coating the hood so thick my lights made it look gray instead of whatever color it had started as. Behind it was something even older, maybe 50s or early 60s. Rounded fenders, that bullet nose style you see in car museums. The weirdest part was that every single one of them had their headlights on. Not bright, not fresh halogens, but this dim, sickly yellow glow like old incandescent bulbs. No one inside. No engines running. No sound but my own tires and the gentle hiss of wind. Now, you're probably thinking the same thing I did. Maybe it was a classic car group doing a themed cruise, and they'd pulled off together. That would have been cool. I actually slowed down, thinking I might see people in period clothes taking photos or hanging out. But the cabins were empty. The windows were rolled up, interiors shadowed but still clear enough in my beams to see cracked vinyl. Steering wheels wrapped with those old covers that crumbled to dust. And on one back seat, a sun-bleached paper map of Arizona from before I-40 even existed. No fresh footprints in the dirt pullouts, no cigarette butts. No engine heat wavering the air. I passed them and told myself a story to stay calm. Maybe they were displays for some kind of roadside attraction I'd just missed. Maybe there was a little private museum out here, and I'd see a sign for it around the next bend. The road stayed empty. The only indication that this was still 66 and not just some forgotten access road was the occasional shield painted on the pavement, half worn away, and the distant ribbon of I-40 off to my right. Trucks sliding past like silent ghosts at a different altitude. Out here, the mother road doesn't feel like nostalgia. It feels like something the modern world decided to leave out in the dark. Somewhere between Seligman and the long, straight push toward Winslow, I spotted a gas station sign in the distance, a tall, old pole with a square on top that used to probably say Phillips or Texaco, but the logo was too faded to make out. The important part was the word open, glowing in red, and a dim yellow rectangle that had to be the office. I'd been planning to push on to Williams or Flagstaff, but the idea of topping off, using a real bathroom, and having a human being within shouting distance was too tempting. I took the little access road off 66 and pulled into a cracked lot that looked like it hadn't been fully repaved since the 70s. There were more cars here, a whole row of them along the far side of the lot, different makes, different eras, all with that same dust-choked look and those dim, unnerving headlights. In the glow from the office, I could see motel units stretching off to one side, single story, each door with a number. Half the letters on the motel sign were dead, so it read MTOL. Under that, vacancy, bright as a tooth. I remember actually laughing to myself because it looked like the kind of place horror podcasts joke about. That laugh didn't last long. The bell over the office door jingled when I went in. It smelled like stale coffee and old paper, the air cooled just enough by an overworked wall unit. Behind the counter sat a man who could have been any age between 60 and 80, thin, deeply lined face, Route 66 cap that might have actually been from the first run of souvenirs. He looked up at me like he'd been expecting exactly one customer tonight, and now that box was checked. "Evenin'," he said. "Late to be on the road." We made small talk. Phoenix plates, yes, just passing through. Thought I'd stick to 66 for the experience. He nodded at all the right places, rang up my gas on an ancient register, handed me a key to the restroom tucked around the side. Then just as I turned away, he said too casually, "Make sure you're back on the highway before the last car leaves." You ever have a sentence hit your spine before your ears catch up? That's what it felt like. I turned back. "What do you mean, last car?" I asked. He blinked, slow, like maybe he hadn't meant to say it out loud. "Folks come and go," he said. "Just don't like people sitting out front alone after the last one pulls out. Road can get strange." The way he said strange made it clear he wasn't talking about drunk drivers. I used the restroom trying to shake it off. The building was cinderblock, fluorescent tube buzzing overhead. Silence so complete that I could hear the liquid in the pipes when someone, somewhere, flushed. When I came back out, the lot felt subtly different. The air was colder, for one thing, like a draft had crept in off the desert. But it was the cars that really got me. When I'd pulled in, their headlights had been scattered here and there, some off, some on. Now, every single one of those old vehicles along the edge of the lot had their lights burning at the exact same intensity, pointed toward the road like a row of eyes. I told myself it was a trick of my nerves. I got back into my car, started the engine, checked my mirrors. That's when I noticed the newest car in the lot, parked nose out right beside the office, a late model sedan like mine, same general shape, different color. Its windows were rolled up, headlights off, but there was something about the angle, the way it was positioned at the end of the row, that made my stomach drop. It looked like the cars I'd passed out on the shoulder earlier, just fresher, like it had just been added to a lineup. As I turned toward the exit, I glanced at the office one last time. The old man was standing in the doorway, silhouetted in that soft yellow light, hand raised. At first, I thought he was waving goodbye. Then I realized his fingers weren't moving. His hand was flat, palm toward me like someone signaling a driver to stop. For a second, I actually eased off the gas, expecting him to step forward and say, I'd forgotten something. He didn't move. His arm didn't even tremble. It was like someone had paused him mid-gesture. The road back to 66 was only a couple hundred yards, but it felt longer. As I merged onto the two-lane again, something made me check my rear view. The lot was already receding into darkness, the motel sign just a dim smear now, but the row of headlights was still visible, only now, one by one, they were winking out. First the Oldsmobile, then the older rounded car, then something that might have been a pickup. Each blinked off in a slow, deliberate sequence until only a single pair remained. Those last lights, cold, yellow, patient, stayed on, turned ever so slightly toward the road, as if watching me leave. I don't know if you've ever had the feeling that you're not just being followed, but escorted. The rest of that night, as I took 66 east toward Williams and then cut back toward I-40. Every time I checked my mirrors, I saw a pair of headlights behind me at what felt like the exact same distance. Not tailgating. Not trying to pass, just there. Sometimes there'd be other cars, real ones that would come up, overtake me, vanish ahead. The pair behind me never changed. Same color, same softness, never gaining, never fading. It was like being tied to a ghost vehicle by an invisible rope. The first real jolt came when I hit Flagstaff. Even late, that town isn't dead. There are train crossings, students out, neon along the slices of Route 66 that run through the city. I took one of the business loops through town just to feel less alone. At a red light, I finally got a good look at the car behind me. It was an older sedan, maybe 80s, with a front end that didn't quite match any model I knew. Its paint was the kind of dull beige you see in faded family photos. And there, in the driver's seat, was nothing. No silhouette, no movement. Just the wheel and the suggestion of an empty bench seat. When the light turned green, my body reacted before my brain could weigh in. I turned left instead of going straight, hopped back toward the interstate on instinct, taking the on-ramp a little too fast. The car behind me followed. Perfect arc, perfect distance. I could feel it like a pressure at the back of my skull. Once we were on I-40 proper, the illusion fell apart a bit. There were too many other vehicles. The light from the overhead signs, the thump of expansion joints under the tires. But even with all that, that pair of pale, old-fashioned headlights never drifted away. For over an hour, as I pushed east toward Winslow, they were my shadow. I pulled off once at one of those small exits that's basically just a gas station and a couple of dark houses, thinking I could let it pass me and fall in behind, prove to myself it was just some other restless driver. I parked on the shoulder of the ramp and killed my lights. Car after car roared past on the interstate below. Trucks, RVs, the occasional packed SUV, no beige sedan. After 5 minutes, 10, 15, my eyes started to sting from staring into the dark. Finally, nerves shot. I started the engine and eased back down to merge. The moment my tires touched the main lane, those headlights were there again in my mirror. Not surging up from behind like they'd been doing 90, not drifting down from some overpass. Just there. Same distance, same soft glow. I gripped the wheel so hard my fingers hurt and told myself not to look back anymore. You can't drive forward if you're staring behind you, right? Easy advice to give. Hard to follow when something you don't understand refuses to let you be alone. I made Winslow just before dawn and pulled into a chain motel right off the interstate, the kind with bright LED lighting and big parking lots full of modern cars. For the first time in hours, I felt like I'd stepped back into a version of the world I recognized. I parked under a lamp, hauled my bag out, and forced myself, to look around the lot. No beige sedan, no dim yellow headlights lurking at the edge. I checked twice, 3 times. Nothing. It should have ended there. I wish it had. But later, showered and shaky, I flipped on the TV just for background noise and pulled up some Route 66 history on my phone, trying to laugh at myself. That's when I found an old photograph in an article about a family that vanished on an Arizona road trip in the late 1970s between Kingman and Winslow. Never made it to their motel. Car later found abandoned on a bypass stretch of 66. In the grainy black and white shot, parked in front of some long-gone gas station, was a car that looked exactly like the one that had been behind me all night. Same lines, same dull color, same empty driver's seat. You couldn't quite see anyone behind the wheel, just reflections. People talk about the Mother Road like it's this benevolent, nostalgic thing, all chrome diners and friendly small towns. If you and I were sitting together right now, just 2 tired travelers swapping stories over bad coffee, I'd tell you to remember this instead. There are stretches of that old pavement that never learned the difference between past and present. They're still running their own convoys, still counting their own, still collecting the cars that never quite finished their trip. So if you ever decide to leave I-40 and chase those historic 66 signs between Kingman and Winslow at night, pay attention to the vehicles on the shoulder. Notice how old their shapes look, how dusty their windows are. And if one of them decides to tuck in behind you and match every turn, every stop, every mile, ask yourself, quietly, which direction its headlights are really pointed. Forward, or back the way it came. You ever notice how snow changes the sound of the highway? How the constant hiss of tires on dry pavement turns into this muted, uneven whisper, like the road is talking under its breath. That's the part that gets you first on I-40 east of Flagstaff in winter. Not the cold, not the elevation, but the way the world goes quiet at 7,000 feet, and the only thing you can really hear anymore is your own breathing inside the car. Slide in closer for this one. Imagine it's just you and me in the front seats, heater struggling to keep up, wipers ticking a slow rhythm, and out there in the darkness on both sides of the interstate, snow-buried pines and miles of high country where, if the road closes, you don't go anywhere until somebody decides to open it again. This happened during one of those late-season storms when the weather apps swear you're past the worst of it, and then the radar lights up again anyway. I was heading east out of Flagstaff toward Holbrook, trying to beat a band of snow the news said would roll in overnight. You'd recognize this stretch if you've ever driven it. The long climb past town, the signs warning about slick conditions between Flagstaff and Ash Fork, the way the desert you left hours ago feels like a different planet now that you're in the pines. The elevation out here is no joke, over 6,000 feet for miles, and when a storm decides to sit on I-40, people get stranded in their cars until morning. By the time I hit the on-ramp, fat flakes were already swirling in the glow of the streetlights. Not a whiteout yet, just that clumpy, lazy snow that makes you think, I can handle this. The lanes were still mostly wet instead of packed. Plows had gone through once, and traffic was thin. Just a few semis, some brave sedans, everyone running under the limit. I tucked myself into the right lane, left some distance from the truck ahead, and settled into that tense posture you get on winter roads. Hands at 10 and 2, shoulders tight, eyes flicking constantly between lane lines, taillights, and the faint reflection of the median posts. It was somewhere around Winslow still ahead, maybe 40 minutes east of Flagstaff, when the snow changed. 1 minute it was falling in lazy diagonals. The next it came straight at the windshield, thick flat sheets like someone had tilted the ground and the sky 90 degrees. The world outside shrank to the space between my headlights. All the texture bled out of the landscape. The pines were just darker smudges in the white. The median was gone, and the left lane disappeared completely under a soft, deceptive blanket. The only proof there had ever been 2 lanes there was the occasional raised reflector bumping under the tires. I eased off the gas. The truck ahead of me faded to a vague red glow, then nothing. No brake lights, no marker lights, just gone. That's not as dramatic as it sounds in a storm. You lose sight of people all the time. But something about how fast those lights dissolved felt wrong, like a curtain had come down between us, not just snow. I checked the mirror. Behind me, there were a couple of sets of headlights, and then just this gray wall. No sky, no horizon, just me in a moving tunnel. When you're in that kind of white tunnel, the sounds inside the car become huge. The heater fan roars. The wipers screech every third pass where ice is starting to seize at the edges. The little rattle in the dash you usually tune out suddenly feels deafening. That's why I noticed the silence when it hit. It wasn't gradual. 1 second the fan was humming and the tires were hissing. The next, everything just stopped. Not the car. The speedometer still read 45. The engine RPMs sat where they should. My foot on the pedal felt normal, but the sound of the road vanished like somebody had thrown a switch. There was no tire noise, no spray from the slush, no thump over expansion joints. The silence was so total that my ears rang. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd gone deaf. That's how hard it hit. Okay, no. I remember saying it out loud, my voice too loud in the cabin. I cracked the window, a hair to prove to myself the world still existed out there. What slid in wasn't the expected cold rush and the rumble of other vehicles. It was nothing. A dead still air that didn't match the way the snow still streaked horizontally across the beams. You know how, when you're moving, there's always a bit of wind noise, some sense of pressure outside. This was like my car had been placed inside a glass box that was being pushed along a track. I checked the speed again. 45. Then the clock. 1:13 a.m. I stared at that time long enough that the digits swam a little, then forced my eyes back to the road. That was when I realized the mile markers had stopped making sense. I just passed 2:15 before the snow got heavy. The next one I saw, half buried on the right, read 2:15 again. I told myself I'd misread it through the snow. Then another one loomed up. Same number, same lean on the post, like a copy and paste in a glitchy video game. There's a specific kind of dread that hits you when the world stops behaving in small, precise ways. Not jump scares, not screaming banshees, just little mechanical failures in reality. The road under me felt smooth, no new ruts, no change in grade, and yet somehow I'd been driving long enough for the clock to tick to 1:21, and the mile marker still said 2:15. My rational brain started throwing explanations at the wall. Maybe there were multiple posts. Maybe I missed one. Maybe the plows had knocked a sign loose and someone stuck it back wrong. The rest of me, the animal part gripping the wheel, knew better. Okay, if I'm really moving, I'll see a truck, I told myself. Somebody will catch up or I'll catch them. I focused on the mirror, waiting for the distant glow of headlights through the white. Nothing. I watched the road ahead, hoping for taillights. Nothing. I flashed my high beams, as if that would somehow signal the universe. The snow didn't even change pattern. It just kept rushing straight at me, endless gray confetti in an endless tunnel. You're probably wondering why I didn't just pull over. That thought crossed my mind too. Just ease onto the shoulder, hazard lights on, wait out whatever this was. But here's the thing. I couldn't see a shoulder. The right edge of the world was a blur of white with occasional poles. I had no idea where the lane stopped and the drop began. And deep down, under the fear, there was this quiet, cold certainty that if I tried to leave the lane, there might not be any ground there at all. That whatever I was on only existed as long as I kept following it. After what felt like 20 minutes of that, curiosity, or panic, made me glance at the clock again. 1:13 a.m., same numbers, same configuration, it hadn't moved. My heart did something ugly in my chest. I lifted my foot off the gas completely and watched the needle. It stayed dead steady at 45 like it had been painted there. No deceleration wobble, no shift in engine sound, just that impossible silent glide. That was when I realized my hands were numb. Not from cold. I could still feel the heat blowing against my fingers when I moved them closer to the vent. But from this tingling, deadened sensation, like I'd been gripping the wheel for hours. My knees ached. My back ached. My eyes burned. Every part of my body told me I'd been driving a long time. The car disagreed. The dashboard insisted we were still in the same minute, same speed, same spot. Somewhere in that numb stretch, I started talking. Not to myself, exactly, but to whoever. To you, the way I am now. I described the snow coming at the glass, the way the lane lines would disappear and then flash back into existence just long enough to keep me centered, the way the world beyond my headlights felt like solid white nothing. I talked about the trapped feeling, like being in an elevator that never arrives at a floor. Saying it out loud anchored me to something human. It also made me notice the first new sound in what felt like hours. A faint, rhythmic thump. It was coming from beneath the car. Not the even rotation of tires over seams. I knew that sound by then. This was slower, offbeat, like something knocking on the undercarriage every few seconds. I eased the wheel back and forth a hair, testing if maybe I'd drifted onto rumble strips. The noise didn't change. If anything, it grew clearer, like something was timing its own movement to match mine, tapping gently on the floor pan to remind me it was there. I made a deal with myself then. Next sign that isn't a mile marker, I'm taking it, I said. Rest area, exit, whatever. I don't care where it goes. I'm getting off. Saying the words out loud felt like pushing through invisible resistance. Like whatever had me wanted me to stay in this looped mile a little longer, a little more worn down. The tapping under the car sped up for a moment, matching my heartbeat, then settled back into that lazy knock. When the sign finally appeared, it came out of the snow all at once, green, reflective, too close for comfort. I only had time to catch a few details. Exit. A number. A town name that started with a W and could have been Winslow or something else entirely. The important part was the arrow. I flicked on my turn signal. Habit, even though there was no one to signal to, and eased toward where the off-ramp should be. For a second, the car fought me. The steering went heavy, as if the lane I was in had deep grooves wanting to keep me there. I forced the wheel over. The tires bit into something rougher than the main lane. Plowed ridge, or packed snow, I couldn't tell. The tapping under the car stopped mid-beat, just cut off. My right tires found the angled grade of the ramp. And for the first time since the silence began, I felt the car actually decelerate. The engine note dipped. The speedometer needle fell. Time lurched. My stomach flipped, like I'd just crested the top of a roller coaster. When I rolled to a stop at the top of the ramp, the world came back in layers. First, the sound of my own engine idling, then the hiss of wind against the body. Then, in the distance, the unmistakable roar of semis on wet pavement. Not in a tunnel, not muffled, real, open-world noise. I killed my headlights and sat there shaking, staring at the clock. It read 2:41 a.m. My hands started to tremble so hard, I had to put them in my lap. I don't know how long that loop lasted. My body says it was an hour and a half. The dash insists it was never more than 60 seconds. The odometer showed maybe a mile of difference from the last gas receipt I had in Flagstaff. None of it adds up in a way that makes sense. What I do know is this. When I merged back onto I-40, behind a line of salt-streaked trucks crawling east, the road felt solid again. The snow looked normal. The mile markers progressed the way they're supposed to. And under my car, there was no more tapping. If you ever find yourself on that stretch of I-40 in a winter storm, east of Flagstaff, west of Winslow, high enough that your ears pop and the pines close in, pay attention to the small stuff. Listen to the way your tires sound. Watch the mile markers. Keep an eye on the clock. If they stop agreeing with each other, if the world goes too quiet and you start seeing the same number on the side of the road over and over again, don't wait for a good explanation. Take the next exit sign you can actually read, even if it's for some nowhere town you've never heard of. Because out there in the high country, there's at least one piece of interstate that doesn't measure distance the way you think it does. And it might decide that you owe it a little extra time. You know how some roads make you feel like you're climbing up the side of the world instead of just driving a hill? Like if you looked straight down out the passenger window, there'd be nothing between you and a very long fall, but a strip of metal someone bolted on as an afterthought. That's what Arizona's 89A does coming down from Jerome toward Cottonwood. A narrow, twisting ribbon of pavement hanging off Mingus Mountain, with 20-mile-an-hour hairpins and 3.5 miles of 6% grade where the only thing between you and the Verde Valley is a guardrail that's seen way too many scrapes. For this one, imagine we're not strangers. Imagine you're right here in the car with me, knees almost touching, your side by the drop, my hands on the wheel, and the whole ghost town of Jerome lit up in the rear view, like an audience watching what happens next. I made the mistake of starting that descent at night. It wasn't supposed to be night. My plan was to leave Prescott in the afternoon, enjoy the Mingus Mountain scenic drive while there was still light, roll through Jerome as a tourist, then drop down to Cottonwood and grab a late dinner. You know how plans go. A late start, a long stop for coffee, some photos at a viewpoint, and by the time I hit the top of the grade above Jerome, the sun was gone. The last smear of red was already fading off the clouds, and the switchbacks below me were just a stack of taillights in the dark where other people had been smart enough to start down earlier. If you've never seen Jerome in person, picture a whole town glued to the side of a hill that didn't want it there. Old mining buildings, narrow streets, switchbacks even inside city limits, the highway itself making a sharp hairpin right through downtown before committing to the drop. I stopped at one of the tiny pullouts just long enough to look down. The Verde Valley was a black ocean with a few scattered lights. The road I was about to take was a pale, thin line, a zipper holding the mountain shut. And down there, cutting across the dark like a scar, was the 3-1-2-mile descent they warn RVs and trucks about in the mountain guides. Sharp curves, steep grade, several drop-offs close enough to the shoulder to make the passenger window feel like a bad idea. Okay, I remember saying, maybe to myself, maybe to whatever else was listening. Just take it slow. I dropped the car into a lower gear like every article tells you to do, rolled forward, and felt gravity grab the weight of the vehicle as we tipped over the lip. If you've ever been on a roller coaster, that first lurch is familiar. It's what came after that wasn't. You can feel every curve personally on 89A. The wheel tugs in your hands. The guardrail flashes in your peripheral vision. Rocks loom inches from your mirror on the inside and nothing but open air waits on the outside. I kept my eyes on the center of my lane, talking myself through each twist. Easy. Easy. You're fine. While you, in this little mental exercise, would be staring down past your feet into the valley, seeing how the headlights of the cars behind us stack up like a spine of light. Except that night, there were no headlights behind us. No one ahead, either. By the second hairpin, it was just me, 2 lanes of aging mountain road, and a drop you could feel in your stomach. The first weird thing was the sound. On any grade like that, you expect certain noises, engine braking, tire whine, the occasional clatter as you hit a rough patch where winter has chewed at the asphalt. I had all that, at first. Then, somewhere around the third curve, the outside world just lowered its volume. Not all at once, like a cut to silence, but like someone slowly turned the knob down on reality and forgot to tell me. The wind faded. The little rocks pinging off the undercarriage went quiet. Even the engine sounded distant. In the sudden hush, the only thing I could clearly hear was the faint, high, metallic ring of the guardrail as my headlights passed over it. Have you ever tapped a piece of metal railing with your finger and listened to the vibration hum along its length? That's what it sounded like, except no one was touching it. Every time I came out of a curve and saw that rail running along the edge, hugging the drop, the ringing got louder in my ears, like the whole barrier was still vibrating from every impact it had ever taken. My hands got slick on the wheel. I wiped one palm on my jeans and felt how cold my skin had gone. I tried to keep my eyes forward, but peripheral vision is its own animal. It feeds you things whether you want them or not. Out of the corner of my eye, in the quick flashes where the rail was closest, I started to think I saw shapes. Shiny arcs on the outside of the metal, darker smears, places where the posts were bent outward just a little too far. The kind of marks that don't come from someone clipping the inside of a curve. The kind that say, something went through here. Hard, more than once. Don't look, I told myself. Don't look. Of course I looked. Coming into one of the tightest hairpins, one of those posted at 15 or 20 where the advisory sign is basically screaming at you. I let my gaze flick sideways for just a second. The rail there wasn't just scraped. It was folded. The top metal had a crease in it like a soda can someone had tried to flatten and then forced back into shape. In the diffuse wash of my headlights, I could see deep vertical grooves in the uprights, low to the ground, the pattern repeating every few posts as the curve swept away from us. For a heartbeat, my brain supplied tires here, spinning, screaming, fighting to climb, marking the steel as they went. That's when I heard the first voice. It wasn't outside. It wasn't on the radio. I had that off to hear the engine. It was right behind my left ear, too close, too level. "Don't miss this one," it said, and my body reacted before my mind did. I braked too hard. The back end of the car twitched, just a whisper of looseness, enough to make your whole nervous system light up. I steered into it on instinct, heart slamming. The drop yawned on your side. For half a second, the headlights lit nothing but empty air beyond the rail. When the tires bit again and we came out of that slide, I pulled us to a crawl. "Nope," I said, shaking my head, voice high and thin even to my own ears. "Nope. We're not doing that. I'm just tired. It's just nerves." But the air in the car felt crowded now. Like the space between the seat and the steering wheel had shrunk. Like someone else was leaning over my shoulder without actually touching me. The ringing in the rail got louder the lower we went. Or maybe it was my imagination tracking the elevation loss, knowing there were 312 miles of this grade from Jerome down to the valley, and we were only partway through. At a straightaway between curves, I tried a stupid test. I took my hands off the wheel for half a second and let go of the gas, just to see what the car would do. It stayed perfectly centered, no drift, no pull toward the mountain, which is what you'd expect on a crowned road, no sense of sliding. But I felt motion anyway, a subtle sideways tug, like 4 invisible hands on the chassis, nudging, coaxing me toward the outside edge. "Keep right," the voice said. Same tone, same distance, calm, like a driving instructor in a movie. "Hug the line. Don't be like the rest of them." Your body knows when a sentence isn't meant for you alone. It lands differently. I gripped the wheel until my fingers hurt. "There is no one else here," I said very clearly. I don't know who I was arguing with. Something in the car, something in the steel, something in my own head, but as soon as the words were out, the temperature dropped. You know that dense, heavy cold you get when you open a walk-in freezer? It washed over my ankles and crawled up behind my knees. I glanced at the dashboard. The outside temp hadn't changed. The next curve was worse. Not because of the geometry, but because of what was on the rail. As the car swung around, my headlights caught on something pale, snagged on a post, a torn strip of fabric, fluttering just enough to move in a wind I couldn't feel. For an instant, it looked like part of a shirt, or maybe a safety vest, dirty and weathered. Then we were past it. The voice behind my ear whispered, "He thought he could take it at 40. You're smarter, aren't you?" That's when it clicked. What I was actually hearing. Not some omniscient narrator, but fragments. Leftover thoughts. The echo of all the moments just before somebody didn't make the curve. Every driver who'd ever realized a second too late that they were going too fast. Every gasp, every last-minute prayer, every cursed, "Oh no." All that panic and regret had to go somewhere. Tonight, for whatever reason, 89A had chosen to let me tune into the station. Once you understand something like that, it doesn't get less scary, it gets worse. Every turn after that had its own residue. On one, a woman's voice, very soft and very clear, saying, "Don't wake the kids, don't let them see," as if she could shield them from what was about to happen by keeping them asleep. On another, a man counting under his breath, 1, 2, 3. "You've got this. 4, 5. Breaking off in a sharp, abrupt silence that made my stomach lurch. A teenage laugh on the straight between curves, too loud and too forced, followed by the squeal of tires that was nowhere in my ears, and somehow all over my skin. I started talking back without meaning to. "I'm not you," I muttered at the windshield. "I'm not going to be you." My pulse thudded in my throat. The steering wheel felt slick, not from sweat, though there was plenty of that, but like the material itself had been worn smooth by every desperate grip it had ever hosted. I slowed to 15, then 10, ignoring whoever might be behind us. There was no one. The road was ours, and something in it was very, very interested in how I chose to drive it. The last hairpin is the one that almost took me. I didn't know it was the last at the time. I just knew that as I came into it, the valley opened up on your side in a sudden, breathtaking drop, and the tiny lights of Cottonwood and Clarkdale winked up like they were at the bottom of a well. The advisory sign said 15. My speedometer said 18. The rail at the outside of the curve looked newer here, less rust, fewer deep gouges. For a second, that reassured me. Then the car's rear wheels hit a patch of gravel or sand that had spilled from the uphill ditch, and the back end started to come around. If you've ever felt a vehicle start to spin on a mountain, you know that microsecond where your brain understands the physics before anything else catches up. The outside drops away. The inside wall rushes up in your peripheral vision. Your body can't tell which way is out anymore. That's the moment I heard all of them at once. Not one voice, not a whisper, but a layered, roaring chorus in my head. The collective gasp of every driver who'd lost traction here. Every last, useless stomp on the brake. Every name shouted into the dark as metal met metal, and then nothing but air. "Left," something said, right in the middle of that storm. Not a scream. Not a panic. A simple, firm instruction. My hands obeyed before I could decide if I trusted it. I turned the wheel into the slide, feathered the brake, felt the rail rushing up in slow motion. For just a heartbeat, I could see it perfectly in the high beams. Fresh scrape marks at bumper height. A patch where the paint was cleaner, like someone had washed it with the side of their car. Under that, overlapping and older, were other scars. Layers and layers of them. The front tire kissed the inside fog line. The rear missed the rail by inches. The car straightened. The voices cut out like someone had yanked a plug. Suddenly it was just me, engine humming, hands shaking, night pressing against the glass. Ahead, for the first time in what felt like an hour, the road began to relax, grade easing, curves widening, guardrail retreating from the immediate edge. We'd reached the bottom. By the time I rolled into Cottonwood, my legs were so rubbery I had to sit in the parking lot of a convenience store for 10 minutes before I trusted them to carry me inside. The world down there felt wrong in its own way. Too flat, too loud, too full of people who had no idea that a few miles up the mountain, a road was still humming quietly with all the moments they'd never lived. I bought a bottle of water I didn't really want, stood under the harsh fluorescent lights and listened to the automatic doors swish open and shut like a normal person doing a normal errand. Later, because that's what you do when something breaks your reality, I went looking for proof I wasn't just exhausted and spooking myself. Drive reports, travel blogs, even TripAdvisor reviews of 89A. People calling it kinda scary, talking about the drop-offs and the way it tests your nerves. Buried in one safety write-up, I found a line about that Jerome to Cottonwood grade. 312 miles of 6% descent, sharp curves, multiple severe crashes over the years, where vehicles went through or over the rail, often attributed to driver error on a road demanding full attention. That's the polite way to put it. Sitting here with you now, at least that's how it feels, like you're in the passenger seat again and we're idling at the top of that hill. I'm going to tell you something simple. If you ever decide to take 89A down from Jerome after dark because you think it'll be an adventure, remember this. The road has a long memory. Every bad decision, every moment of overconfidence, every second where somebody hesitated or took a curve a little too hot, it keeps all of that. And on some nights, when the mountain is quiet and the valley lights look close enough to touch, it might decide it doesn't want you to make the same mistake. Or it might be very interested to see if you do. You know how a lot of ghost town stories feel like tourist traps until you're actually the one driving past them in the dark? Canyon Diablo is like that on paper. Old railroad camp, violent history, now just crumbling stone and rusted cars out in the desert between Winslow and Flagstaff. But it hits different when your GPS quietly reroutes you off I-40 at exit 230 in the middle of the night and tells you the fastest way back to the highway is a frontage road that doesn't show up on any map you recognize. For this one, slide over in your head and take the passenger seat. Feel the rumble of the tires as we leave the clean, bright interstate and roll onto older, rougher pavement, the kind that still remembers when this was Route 66 and the only way across the Canyon of the Devil. I was coming east from Flagstaff toward Winslow, late enough that the truck stops were thinning out and the desert on either side of the highway was just a flat, dark ocean, occasionally broken by the flash of a reflector post. If you've driven that stretch, you know the rhythm. Long, quiet miles, then a little cluster of lights at a place like Twin Arrows or Meteor Crater, then darkness again. I was tired, too tired, eyes hot, brain in that fuzzy place where you start trusting the GPS more than you trust your own sense of direction. So when the soothing voice on the dash chirped, "In 1 mile, take exit 230 toward local access road," I didn't question it. It said there was construction ahead, heavy traffic, 10-minute delay. 10 minutes doesn't sound like much until you've been on the road all day. Then any shortcut looks like mercy. Exit 230 is the one for two guns. You've probably seen the sign in daylight and written it off as another weird tourist name. At night, it's just a rectangle of green that your headlights catch and then lose. I took the ramp, following the arrow for frontage road, and immediately felt the difference under the tires. The smooth hum of I-40 turned into a rough, rattling vibration as we hit cracked asphalt patched a few too many times. Off to the right, for a second, I saw the faint outline of something. Stone walls, maybe, low and broken, like the bones of old buildings. But then the road curved, and they dropped out of sight. There's a particular kind of silence that lives out there. Not the normal highway quiet, not the soft whoosh of cars far away. This was the sound of a place that used to be loud, gunfights, trains, saloons, and has been empty long enough that the noise has sunk into the ground. I killed the radio without really thinking about it. The only light was my own, the only movement the circle of desert my beams could reach. The GPS piped up again. Continue straight for 3.8 miles, then turn left to rejoin I-40. Easy enough. 3.8 miles of old road in exchange for skipping a slowdown. Fine. The first mile was almost normal. The road paralleled the interstate at a distance, just far enough that I could see the occasional sweep of headlights on the overpass ahead. The pavement was bad, potholes, faded centerline, but passable. On the right, the land fell away more sharply than I liked, the dark hint of a cut, where I knew, from too many late-night Wikipedia binges, that the railroad and the old highway had once crossed Canyon Diablo itself, a deep, narrow gorge that got its name from Spanish explorers who didn't like what they saw when they looked down. I told myself I'd drive slow, get through, and be back on the big road before my coffee wore off completely. Then the interstate lights vanished. One moment, there were faint, comforting stars of red and white off my left shoulder, a quiet promise that other people were out there. The next, I came over a slight rise, and they were just gone. No overpass glow, no truck markers, nothing. The GPS map zoomed out, and for a second showed my little arrow moving across empty beige, like the frontage road had fallen off its own database. Recalculating, it said, in that same calm voice. Continue straight. You know that sense you get sometimes, driving at night, that the landscape has shifted while you weren't looking. That's what hit me then. The air coming in through the cracked window smelled different. Colder, metallic, almost like old rain on hot steel. The road ahead narrowed, the center stripe finally giving up and vanishing altogether. On the right, something pale flashed in my high beams, the side of a concrete culvert or abutment, old and stained, leading toward a darkness that felt too deep to belong on a frontage road. Canyon Diablo. I knew it with the same kind of certainty you know when someone is staring at you from across a room. The first set of headlights appeared behind us without ever having approached. I saw it in the rear view. 1 second the mirror showed only the jittering smear of my own taillights on cracked pavement. The next there was a pair of dim yellow eyes 100 yards back. They weren't bright, like modern halogens, not bluish like LEDs, more like the weak glow of an old generator barely keeping up. I relaxed a notch. Another car meant I wasn't the only idiot following this detour. Maybe they were a local who'd blow by me and prove it was fine. They didn't gain. As I rolled along at a cautious 30, they stayed exactly the same distance behind. On one curve, I slowed to 20. The lights dimmed a little, like their driver had eased off too. On the next straight, I tested something. I tapped the brake twice, that quick, subtle signal you give someone tailgating you to say, back off. The lights behind me flashed in perfect sync. 2 small bursts of brightness, like whoever was back there had hit their brakes at the exact same moment I did. It felt like looking into a mirror. You shifted in your seat just now, didn't you? That little internal twitch, like your own foot wanted to press a pedal. That's how it felt in the car, like I wasn't just seeing another driver. I was seeing my own actions echoed a few seconds behind. I checked the rear view harder, trying to catch more detail. The beams were low, almost too low, as if the car were riding heavy, or its suspension had given up years ago. For a moment, I thought I saw the faint outline of an old-style grille, something from the 40s or 50s, but the reflection warped and broke in the roughness of the road. 2 miles to turn left, the GPS said. Its map now showed a thin line crossing a blue slash labeled Canyon Diablo, then reconnecting with the thicker bar of the interstate. I knew enough history to picture the scene a century earlier. Railroad crews stalled here for months while they figured out how to span the gorge, a whole shanty town springing up around them. Hell Street full of saloons and brothels and card tables. Bodies buried where they fell when the cemetery filled up. People called it meaner than Tombstone. The first marshal supposedly lasted 5 hours before someone shot him. And here I was, following a ghost of that route in a little economy car, chased by headlights that moved when I moved. The road dipped toward the canyon. I couldn't see it yet. Not really, just hints. The way the right-hand land dropped away more sharply. The way the air, coming in the vent, suddenly turned cooler and drier, as if it had crawled up out of stone instead of flowing over flat desert. My palms were slick now. I wiped them on my jeans one at a time, never fully letting go of the wheel. Ahead, the beams finally picked out the outline of the bridge. Not the big steel railroad span I knew still carried BNSF trains, but a smaller, older structure, a concrete arch with low walls, wide enough for 2 cautious vehicles, its surface patched and repatched until the original roadbed was only a memory. I eased down to 20. The headlights behind me did the same. As my front tires touched the beginning of the bridge, something in my ears changed. You know that hollow, drumming echo you hear when you drive over a river on a hot day? This was like that, but thinner. Like the sound underneath us had a long way to fall before it hit bottom. The steering went light. The guard walls to either side rose just high enough that I couldn't see over them without craning my neck, but in my mind, I could feel the drop, the sheer walls of the chasm, the dry wash at the bottom where so many other travelers had looked up at the sky one last time. Halfway across, the lights ahead of me flickered, not mine, the ones from above. For a moment, the whole world brightened. The underside of a much larger bridge overhead lit up, steel girders and concrete piers ghosting into view where the I-40 crossing should be. And on that bridge, blurred by distance and impossible angles, I saw a truck flash past. Just a normal semi, hauling what might as well have been groceries or furniture, oblivious to the fact that directly beneath its wheels, in some older layer of the world, my little car was crawling across the same canyon on a road that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. That was when I realized the lights behind me weren't reflecting off the bridge walls. There was no shine, no bounce. It was like the concrete swallowed their glow. I glanced at the mirror and for the first time got a clear, steady look. The car back there, if it was a car, didn't match any silhouette I knew. Its headlights were set too close together, low and round, almost like lanterns hung on a crossbar. There was no marker light, no glint from a windshield, just those 2 points of pale yellow, steady as eyes. A thought dropped into my head then, so strong it might as well have been spoken out loud. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop on the bridge. I don't know if that warning came from my own survival instinct, from every urban legend I'd ever heard about haunted crossings, or from something else that had been watching travelers here since this was just a wagon track. All I know is that as that sentence formed, the car jerked. Just a tiny hesitation like someone had brushed the brake pedal under my foot. The engine note dipped. In the split second it took me to push back, to press into the gas. The headlights behind surged toward us in the mirror, closing half the distance with impossible speed. Your heart is beating faster right now, isn't it? Mine was punching at my ribs like it wanted out. I mashed the accelerator. The tires scrabbled for purchase on old concrete, caught, and the little car leapt forward. The bridge seemed to stretch ahead, each expansion joint coming a beat later than it should, like I was running in a dream. Behind us, those yellow points of light bloomed larger, closer, not because I was slowing, but because they were folding the distance up like it didn't matter. Then, as suddenly as stepping out of a cold room into summer air, we were off the span. The front wheels hit cracked desert asphalt again. The echo under the car snapped off, and the world rushed back to normal volume. Crickets I hadn't heard a moment before screamed in the brush. The wind buffeted the frame. Somewhere far above, a freight train horn wailed long and lonely. I shot past a leaning sign that might once have said Route 66 in black on white, now so faded it was just a ghost of a shield. I took the first left the GPS told me to, a rough rise that climbed back toward the interstate. As I bumped and rattled up the incline, I risked one last look. The bridge below was empty. No headlights, no cars, no sign that anyone had been there but me. In the distance, across the black slash of the canyon, I could see the ruins of Canyon Diablo proper. Low stone rectangles, the skeletal remains of buildings along what had been Hell Street, where gamblers and outlaws once walked out of saloons and never walked back in. A place so violent they buried men where they fell because the cemetery was full. Back on I-40, the traffic jam the GPS had promised never materialized. The lanes were clear. The clock on the dash said I'd lost maybe 10 minutes, nothing more. But when I checked my odometer against my last gas stop, the numbers didn't line up with the distance I should have covered. A mile or two gone missing. Too small to prove, too big to ignore. Later, in some motel room with weak Wi-Fi, I looked up Canyon Diablo again. Read about the gunfights, the robberies, the hanging that got interrupted by lightning, the way trains used to stop here, and crews would refuse to get off because the town was that bad. I found a modern travel piece that said you could still drive out to the ghost town on a rough road from two guns if you were willing to take it slow and risk the rocks. One line stuck with me. Today, Canyon Diablo is quiet. It is a haunted place, haunted by the history of its turbulent past. The trains don't stop here anymore. Maybe they don't. Maybe the big engines roar across on the new bridge and never look down. But there's at least one other crossing still out there. A thinner one, a little closer to whatever passes for the old world in that canyon. On some nights, if you trust the wrong voice in your dashboard and follow a detour that isn't there in daylight, you might find yourself on it. And if a pair of dim yellow headlights appears behind you and refuses to behave like they belong to anything built after 1920, do yourself a favor. Keep moving until your tires hit the main line again. Don't stop on the span. Don't pull over to see the view. The Canyon of the Devil has seen enough last looks already. You ever notice how some drives feel like they're happening on the surface of the world, and others feel like they're happening on top of something that's still awake underneath? I-17 between Phoenix and Flagstaff does that to you, especially around Camp Verde and up toward the Mogollon Rim. Long climbs, runaway truck ramps, rock walls that look like they've been watching traffic since before there were cars. For this one, don't picture yourself listening from a couch. Slide into the passenger seat beside me. Feel the belt across your chest, the weight of the grade under your feet, and the way the dark out past the guardrail doesn't feel empty so much as patient. I was making the drive north on a Sunday night. One of those end-of-weekend migrations where half of Phoenix decides to go back up to the Pines at the same time. You've probably done it. City lights in the rear view, desert scrub sliding past, the temperature on the dash dropping degree by degree as the elevation climbs. By the time you hit the long pull into Camp Verde, you're in that weird zone where it's not quite high country yet, but it's not low desert either. The highway tips down into the valley, then claws its way back up toward the rim, and ADOT has put runaway truck ramps on both sides for a reason. Trucks lose their brakes out here. People underestimate the grade. You hear the stories. This was late, close to midnight, so the usual stream of RVs and minivans had thinned out. It was mostly semis by then, those endless refrigerated trailers humming along in the right lane, hazard lights blinking as they ground up the climb. I'd been behind one of them for a while, watching his brake lights stutter on the downgrades, then glow solid red as he hit the steeper sections. When we started into the long descent toward Camp Verde, the kind where the signs warn you to check your brakes and downshift, I did what they tell you. Dropped a gear, let the engine do the work, kept my speed steady. You ever feel watched from behind on the highway? Not just tailgated, but monitored. I felt it about halfway down that hill. The truck ahead of me had eased off, letting gravity pull him but not run away with him, and I'd left plenty of space. That should have felt safe. Instead, the back of my neck prickled. I checked the mirror. A pair of headlights was just cresting the top behind us, far enough back that I couldn't tell much about the vehicle yet. No big deal. I turned my eyes forward again. When I checked a few seconds later, they were closer. A lot closer. There's a rhythm to how cars catch you on a grade. They either gain slowly, giving you time to plan, or they come flying and blow past when they find a gap. This set didn't do either. One moment they were a distant glow. The next they were hanging just at the edge of my rear bumper. No in-between. No arc of approach. Just there. The beam pattern looked wrong, too. Low and wide. Not like the sharp cut of a modern headlight, but more like something older, duller. I couldn't see the grille. I couldn't see the driver. Just that flat wash of white on my back glass. I shifted to the right as far as I safely could, in case they wanted to pass on the left. They matched me, staying dead center. I tapped my brake lightly, just enough to make my lights flash, a warning. The headlights behind me responded in perfect sync, brightening and dimming like they'd echoed my exact pressure. I felt that in my gut more than my brain at first, the way you feel someone walking in stepped directly behind you in a dark hallway. A little too close, a little too coordinated. Okay, I said out loud, keeping my voice steady for your sake as much as mine. We've got a joker. I eased my foot off the gas to open up more space ahead, hoping the truck might absorb their attention instead. The semi in front of us, bless him, signaled and took a runaway ramp turnout to do a brake check or just get away from the nonsense. For a few seconds, it was just me and the headlights behind, dropping down a grade that was starting to steepen. You could feel the pull now, a physical tug in your stomach, as gravity tried to have its way with the car. The signs on the shoulder kept reminding us, 5% grade, 6%, check speed, watch brakes, long downhill ahead. I kept it at a conservative 5, even though the limit's higher there. The road curved gently right, the black wall of mountain on one side, the guardrail and black drop on the other. The headlights behind me never wavered. No drift to one side, no hesitation when we hit the curve. It was like being towed by light. Then I heard it, a faint, high-pitched whine underneath the normal road noise. At first, I thought it was my own brakes, the sound they make when the pads are wearing thin and you ride them too hard on a hill. But my foot was barely touching the pedal. The sound grew louder, rising in pitch like something was being spun faster and faster. It wasn't in my car, it was behind us. If you've ever heard a truck lose its brakes on a grade, you don't forget it. There's a specific clatter to it, a grinding roar as the drums overheat and the shoes glaze, followed by that awful rising rattle as the driver pumps a pedal that stopped responding. This wasn't that exactly, but it was close enough to hit the same nerve. The headlights behind me started to bob up and down slightly, like the vehicle was pitching forward harder than it should with every invisible press. But they didn't fall back. They didn't surge ahead. They just hung there, locked on my tail, while the sound of straining brakes that weren't mine climbed into a panicked whine. "Take the ramp," I whispered under my breath, as if the unseen driver could hear me. There was one coming up on the right, a long gravel tongue rising off the main line like an escape hatch, built specifically for trucks that had lost control on this exact hill. The sign for it flashed past in the headlights. Runaway truck ramp 1 mile. My hands were damp on the wheel. I thought about taking it myself, just to get away from whatever was glued to my bumper. But those ramps are deep, soft, designed to swallow weight. You don't just pop in and out of them. And besides, the thing behind me wasn't acting like it wanted an exit. It was acting like it wanted a witness. "I'm not dying in a pileup on 17, I told you, voice low and tight. Not tonight." The grade steepened again. I dropped another gear and felt the engine protest, then settle into a higher roaring note. The whine from behind turned into something more like a scream. Metal on metal, hot and distressed. In the mirror now, I could just barely make out the top line of a cab behind the glare, tall and boxy. A semi then, or something like it. But there was no logo on the trailer, no reflective stripes, just a darker absence of light against the desert. The runaway ramp appeared on the right, lit by its own little bank of floodlights, gravel ridges waiting to catch anything out of control. I pulled a hair left to make room. If the truck took it, I was ready to slide by and get out of the way. The headlights behind wobbled once, twice, as if the driver were wrestling the wheel, then blew right past the ramp entrance without even a twitch. The whine cut off, not faded, stopped, like a hand pulled a plug, for a heartbeat. There was nothing but the sound of my own car and my own too loud breathing. That's when the cab appeared. You ever see something in your mirror that your brain refuses for a second to accept? The shape behind me finally resolved in the glare. A cab-over truck, old style, the kind you don't see much anymore on American highways. Squared off front, flat nose, the windshield almost vertical. No company markings, no dot numbers. It was riding too low, like its suspension had collapsed under a load it couldn't handle. But the trailer behind it didn't seem to be there. There was just shadow, too dark even for the night around us. The cab's headlights were wrong, too. Up close, I could see they weren't emitting light the way they should. They were more like points where light stopped. Black centers ringed in a dull halo, like someone had punched holes in reality and was shining something cold through from the other side. I know how that sounds. Sitting here with you, I'd call myself crazy if I hadn't felt the way my body reacted in that moment. Every hair up, every muscle locked. Out of nowhere, my car surged forward. Just a little, just enough that the speedo jumped 5 miles an hour without my foot moving. It felt like being shoved by a giant hand between the shoulder blades. I tightened my grip and rode it, eyes glued to the lane, while behind us the cab stayed welded to my path. Curve left. It floated left. Curve right. It swung in lockstep. The grade went steeper. Ahead, down in the dark, I could see the dim suggestion of Camp Verde's lights waiting in the valley. We weren't there yet. We were still on the mountain. "Why me?" I asked quietly. Maybe I was talking to you. Maybe I was talking to whatever was back there. I'd heard stories. Everyone in Arizona hears them. About fatal wrecks on this stretch. About trucks that lost their brakes and never made it to the bottom. About families wiped out in an instant because someone underestimated physics on a long, steep hill. Maybe this truck was one of those, stuck on an endless repetition of the worst minute of its driver's life. Maybe it needed someone to see it, to know it had happened. Maybe it wanted company. As if in answer, shapes flickered in the cab's windshield. Not faces exactly, more like layers of movement. A hand slamming down, hard, where a brake knob should be. A head whipping back in slow motion as the realization hit. No stopping. A mouth open in a shout you can't hear over the roar. Then nothing. Then the sequence again, like a looped video playing 1 second behind real time. I realized then that if I looked too long, I was going to join that loop. The car had crept back up to highway speed without my permission. The grade wasn't as steep here, but momentum is its own kind of trap. The next sign warned of a curve ahead, speed reduced. Past that lay the flat stretch into the bottom of the valley and the relative safety of level ground. One more big bend between us and out. "Here's the deal," I said, still talking to the empty air, as if you were right there to hear it. "You can follow me to the bottom. You can scream in my mirrors, but you're not taking me through the rail." I eased off the gas, felt the engine drag, kept my foot off the brake. Old advice: don't ride them, don't overheat them, let the machine hold you back. The cab behind did something I hadn't seen it do yet. It drifted a few inches to the left, as if considering a pass. For the first time, I saw past it to the road beyond. There was no trailer, no load, just that unnatural shadow stitched to its rear axle. We went into the last big curve together. Rock wall on one side, guardrail, and nothing on the other. I could feel the weight of that absence through the passenger window. If you'd been really sitting there, your stomach would have dropped at the sight of how far down the dark went. The truck, if that's what it was, edged closer, those dead headlights filling the mirror, until I couldn't see anything else. Instinct screamed at me to hit the brakes, to get it off my tail. Training and survival and something older all said, "Don't you dare." So I didn't. I held the wheel steady. Watched the yellow line come and go, felt the tires bite. Halfway through the curve, the pressure behind us stopped. No fade out, no gradual easing. One moment there was the visceral sensation of something huge crowding our bumper. The next, there was empty space. The mirror showed only my own rear glass, the guardrail flicking past, and beyond that, the lights of Camp Verde beginning to rise to meet us. The grade leveled. My ears popped. The engine's roar softened to a hum. At the bottom, near the exit signs and the glowing totems of gas station logos, I pulled off without even deciding to. I parked under the harsh white light of a truck stop canopy and sat there, heart slamming, hands welded to the wheel. Every sound felt too loud now. The hiss of air brakes from real, tangible semis, the low murmur of voices, the ding of a convenience store door. Normal life, regular danger, the kind you can see. Later, with coffee shaking in my hand, I did the same thing everyone does after something like that. I went looking for proof I wasn't alone. Articles about I-17 around Camp Verde, bits about long, steep descents and runaway ramps. Crash reports where "failed to control speed on downgrade" was the dry phrase that covered an entire family's last moments. I didn't find any mention of a phantom cab over with dead lights. I did find one forum post from a driver who said, almost as a joke, that on bad nights he felt like there was always one more truck coming down that hill with him, one he could hear but never quite see. So now I'm passing it on to you from as close as I can get, sitting side by side in this story instead of in that car. If you ever find yourself dropping into Camp Verde after dark, engine brake humming, signs warning you about the grade, pay attention to the weight behind you. If a set of headlights appears without ever quite arriving, if you start hearing the whine of failing brakes that don't belong to your vehicle, if you get that animal certainty that something huge and desperate is riding your bumper, remember this: the ramp is there for the living. The loop behind you already missed its chance. Hold your speed. Let the engine work. And whatever you do, don't join that final, endless descent. You ever notice how some jobs make you invisible until something goes wrong? Night shift motel work on Route 66 in Flagstaff is like that. You're there for everyone else's road trip, but nobody really sees you unless a key doesn't work or the ice machine dies. That's where this happened to me, a few blocks off the main drag, where the mother road cuts through town, neon humming, freight trains rattling past, and the mountain air cold enough at 2 a.m. that every time the front door opens, it feels like the whole lobby breathes in. Slide over next to me behind the counter for a bit. Feel the worn edge under your palms, the cheap coffee cooling in a paper cup by the keyboard, the steady tick of the office clock, and the way the glass in the lobby door reflects more than just what's in the room. This wasn't one of the famous haunted hotels you've heard about. Those are down closer to the old railroad district. The Monte Vista, the Weatherford, the places with plaques and ghost tours and people begging for something weird to happen in their rooms. This was a budget place a little farther east near the I-40 business loop. A long, low building with doors that opened straight to the parking lot and a faded Route 66 sign over the office that only fully lit up when it felt like it. We got the overflow, hikers who missed their exit, families priced out of the cute spots downtown, truckers who just wanted a bed and a receipt. and one woman who came back again and again for a room nobody was allowed to use. She first showed up in late October. Shoulder season, when the leaves are still doing their thing up on the peaks, but the nighttime temps have already gone winter sharp. I remember, because there was a thin dusting of snow on the San Francisco peaks when I came in that evening, and the kind of freezing fog around the streetlights that makes everything look like an old photograph. It was after midnight when the lobby door chimed and she stepped in. No drama, no horror movie entrance, just the soft scrape of sensible shoes and the sound of someone who'd been on the road all day, letting their shoulders drop the second they were inside. Up close, she looked like every solo traveler who's just a little too old for hostels and a little too practical for cute Airbnbs. Late 30s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back, jeans, a brown jacket that had seen a lot of miles. No luggage except a beat-up carry-on roller and a messenger bag. What stuck with me, what still sticks, if I close my eyes while we're talking, is how dry she was. It had been spitting snow off and on, enough to leave wet footprints from anyone who'd just crossed the lot. Her shoes were perfectly clean. Not dusty, not muddy, just untouched. Checking in, I asked, because that's what you ask even when the answer's obvious. She smiled the way people do when they're too tired to really commit. Just for the night, she said. Her voice was soft, no obvious accent. Same room as last time, if it's free. I almost said, we've never met. Instead, I bought myself a second by tapping at the keyboard, pulling up the reservation grid even though there was no way she'd stayed recently. I would have remembered. Which room was that? I asked. 247, she said without hesitation. That number landed like a dropped wrench. Every property has its off-limit spaces. Rooms under renovation, long-term holds, units that became storage by accident and never made it back into rotation. For us, that was 247. Old leak damage, an incident years back. A manager who liked to say legal reasons and then change the subject. The system showed it in red, blocked, do not rent. Even the physical key was in a separate little slot on the board, labeled with a strip of ancient masking tape instead of the standard plastic tag. Sorry, I said automatically. That one's out of service. She tilted her head a fraction, like she'd heard something almost right. Oh, I know, she said. You told me that last time too. You know that feeling when someone drops a detail that doesn't just conflict with your memory, but steps on its throat. That's what that sentence did. I scanned the arrivals list for her last name even though she hadn't given it yet. Nothing. I pulled up previous weeks. Still nothing. We weren't a huge property. After a few months, you start recognizing the regulars. She would have stood out. I can put you near it, I offered, defaulting to customer service autopilot. 245 or 249 are both open. She hesitated, then nodded once. 245 is fine, she said, as long as I'm on that side. I made the key. Cash transaction, no card, no ID beyond a quick flash of a license that I only half registered. Arizona issue. But the city blurred in my memory almost immediately, like I'd looked at it through fog glass. She signed the reg card with a looping first name I remember starting with an L and an illegible last. Then she took the key, wrapped the strap of her messenger bag tighter around her shoulder, and asked the question that lodged in my brain and refused to leave. Is the door still sealed? She said. Or did they finally repaint it? I knew exactly which door she meant. 247 had a strip of heavy tape over the frame, one of those tamper seals maintenance uses when they don't want anyone wandering in by mistake. It had been there since before I started, its edges curled and dirty, a reddish smear across the middle that everyone insisted was from the old fire damage, even though there'd never been a fire in that room's incident report. Still sealed, I said before I could stop myself. Good, she replied. You should keep it that way. Most guests forget you 5 minutes after they walk out of the lobby. She didn't. Over the next 3 months, she came back 4 more times. Never booked ahead. Always between midnight and 3, like she was timing her arrival for the deadest part of the night. Always asked for 247 first, 245 second. Always paid cash. And every time, the same pattern. A few hours in the room, no extra towels, no calls for Wi-Fi help, no noise complaints. She'd check out before my shift ended, key on the counter, sometimes with a polite nod, sometimes with a quiet, "See you next time." Like we were picking up a conversation in installments. Here's where you slide a little closer, because this is where the line between coincidence and something else started to fray. The first time I heard the knock, I thought it was a joke. Night was especially slow, storm warnings up on the passes. Interstate traffic thinned to long-haul truckers who preferred the brighter chains right off I-40. The cameras showed empty walkways. The occupancy report said we had maybe a dozen rooms filled across 2 floors, most of them near the front. 245. Her room that night was at the far end of the back wing upstairs, a place people sometimes complained felt too quiet. I was halfway through a cup of over-steeped coffee when the intercom crackled with a noise from the second-floor hall camera. Not speech, not footsteps. Just that little hiss the system gives when something moves in frame. I thumbed the monitor to that angle. For a second, all I saw was the usual stained concrete walkway, metal rail, doors with their little peepholes staring blankly at the lot. Then something flickered in front of 247. A shadow, maybe, or a patch of darker dark, like someone had stepped just out of the camera's sweet spot. I squinted, leaned closer. That's when the audio picked up the sound, faint but unmistakable through the cheap mic overhead. 3 knocks, slow, even, on 207's door. Not the rapid, uncertain tapping of a drunk in the wrong place. Not the heavy pounding of someone locked out. Just 3 calm, measured raps. Then silence. On the monitor, the hallway was empty. No movement. No one stepping away. The feed's timestamp put it at 2:17 a.m. I did what you probably would have done in my place. Told myself it was the building settling, or the mic glitching, or some combination of cheap electronics and my own boredom. I almost left it there. Almost. Then the phone on the desk rang. That old plastic thing that sounds like every motel phone in every movie you've ever seen. "Front desk," I answered, eyes still on the monitor. A pause, then her voice from 245. "Hey, did you guys unseal that door?" Cold, right where the spine meets the neck. "No, ma'am," I said. "It should still be sealed." "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, she sounded like someone trying not to spook a nervous animal. "Because someone just knocked on it," she said quietly. 3 times. And when I looked through the peephole, there was tape on my side, too. I went up. Of course I did. You don't leave a guest marinating in that. The walk down that back upstairs corridor felt wrong in a way I couldn't put into words at the time. The air a little too still. The buzz of the fluorescent security lights just a hair off frequency. The carpet runner down the middle of the concrete feeling softer under my feet than it ever had before. Her door, 245, was closed, latch engaged. The peephole was clear. No tape, no smudge, just that tiny glass eye. 247, though. 247 looked exactly the same as it always had. Tamper seal across the jamb, edges curled, that dark smear dead center where someone's hand had maybe brushed it years ago. The metal number plate was slightly crooked. There was dust in the corners of the threshold, the kind that only builds when no one opens a door for a long time. I pressed my knuckles lightly to the wood and listened. Nothing. The kind of nothing that makes your ear hurt. "Everything looks okay out here," I called softly, so she'd hear me through the wall. "Are you sure about the knock?" Her answer came muffled. "I felt it through the headboard," she said, like it was on the other side. We both let that hang there. Later, when she checked out, she didn't mention it again. She just left the key and gave me a look that felt almost like apology. "You shouldn't be up here alone at night," she said. Not on this side. I work nights, I told her, because what else was there to say? That's what I mean, she replied, and was gone. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. She came, she stayed, the knocks happened, not every night she was there, and never when she wasn't. Always around the same time, give or take 10 minutes either side of 2.15. Always 3 beats, always on 247. The camera never caught a body. Sometimes the audio picked it up, sometimes it didn't. Once, when I was feeling braver than I should have, I waited until after the 3rd knock and then called the room instead of going up. "Don't open your door," I said as soon as she picked up. "I wasn't planning to," she answered, like we were agreeing on the weather. "Why do you keep coming back?" I asked. Long silence. I could hear the low whir of the heater in her room, the highway in the distance, the faint, familiar rumble of a freight train on the BNSF line that runs just north of 66 through town. Then, "Because the last time I didn't," she said, "and I need to make sure they don't make that mistake again." You ever get information in the wrong order? That sentence hit like that. I didn't understand it. Not then, not fully. But it put weight on everything that had felt weird before. On the way, she always asked about the seal. On the fact that, when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd check the corners of the hallway ceiling, the bases of the door frames, the places a fire or smoke would travel first. The only reason I'm not still wondering if I imagined all of this is what happened on my night off. Another clerk covered my shift. A guy from days who liked the overtime and didn't believe half the stuff regulars said about the property. Around 3 in the morning, my phone lit up with a text from him. "Dude, did you double block 247? The screen grab he sent a minute later was of the night log. The system showed a room move. Guest in 245 transferred to 247 per guest request. Timestamp 2:10 a.m. Authorization, my manager's override code. The manager was home, asleep. I was on my couch, a county away. I called. He didn't answer at first. When he finally picked up, his voice was thin and too fast. "It fixed itself," he said before I could ask anything. "The log, it reverted. She's still in 245. "Did you move her?" I asked. "No," he said. But for a minute, the computer thought I had, and the key drawer opened on its own. He told me later that the woman had come down around 2:30 with her bag already packed, eyes wide and very awake. "They're getting better at it," she'd said. "Next time, watch the wires." He hadn't known what that meant until he went upstairs and found the seal on 247 peeled back just enough that the contact sensor wires in the frame had been exposed. Not cut, not tripped, just touched, like someone had been feeling for a weakness. I'll be honest with you, I don't know what's behind that door, officially on paper. It's water damage from a burst pipe a decade ago and a guest injury in a lawsuit that never quite went the motel's way. Unofficially, among staff, it's the room where a long-haul driver checked in during a snowstorm and never checked out, where housekeeping found the bed made, the shower dry, the TV still on the highway conditions channel, and a wallet full of cash on the dresser. No sign of him leaving, no footage of him crossing the lot, just a blank spot in the timeline and a door that started showing up in people's dreams. What I know is this: the woman who keeps asking for that door to stay sealed walks like someone who's carried guilt up and down this state 100 times. Once, when the lobby was empty and the coffee was fresh and the snow outside had let up enough that the neon could reflect in the wet asphalt without streaking, I asked her point blank, "Were you here when it happened?" She looked at me for a long time, eyes darker than the window behind her. "We were on a road trip," she said finally. Flagstaff was a stop. He wanted the upstairs corner room so he could see the trains. I fell asleep before he came back with the bags. She swallowed. When I woke up, the bed was made. My things were in 245. "And him?" I asked, because you're probably asking it in your head right now, too. Her gaze drifted to the security monitor, where the grainy image of that silent hallway floated in black and white. Some of us keep driving, she said. Some of us get stuck. I'm just making sure the stuck part doesn't get any more company than it already has. So, if you ever find yourself in a budget motel on Route 66 in Flagstaff, the kind with exterior corridors and tired carpet and a clerk who looks a little too alert for 3 in the morning, pay attention to which room they give you. If the number on your key is 1 digit off from a door with a sealed frame and old tape across the jamb, don't ask for an upgrade. Don't joke about the haunted one. And if, around 2:17 a.m., you feel 3 slow knocks reverberate through your headboard from the other side of the wall, remember this conversation between us, across whatever distance is between your speakers and the dark. Stay in your bed. Keep your eyes on your own door. Some knocks, out here, aren't invitations. They're roll calls. And you do not want your name added to that side of the hallway. You ever notice how authority can feel more dangerous than anything supernatural when you're alone on the road at night? Not the idea of cops in general. Most of the time, they're exactly who you want to see when your car dies at the wrong mile marker. But that one, specific scenario, where the lights hit your mirror, your stomach drops, and a quiet part of you whispers, "What if this isn't what it looks like?" For this one, imagine we're not telling this after the fact. Imagine you're in the passenger seat with me on I-17, climbing out of Phoenix toward Flagstaff in the dark, and the only things holding our world together are the white lane lines, the rumble strip, and the assumption that the blue and red flashing behind us belong to the living. It was a weeknight in early spring, the kind where Phoenix is still warm enough at midnight that you can drive with the window cracked. But as you head north, the temperature drops 10, 15 degrees every half hour. I'd left the city late after visiting family, way later than I meant to. And by the time I passed Black Canyon City, the traffic had thinned to long-haul trucks and the occasional car heading home from who knows where. You know that section, the Black Canyon stretch, where the desert folds into low mountains and the highway cuts through them in long black curves. The kind of place with those next services 30 miles signs and enough elevation change that your ears start to pop and unpop for no good reason. I was doing 72 in a 75, both hands on the wheel, cruise control off, because the grades there never quite match what the dashboard thinks they should. The sky was crisp and clear, one of those salt and pepper nights where stars scatter all the way down to the horizon. The radio was off. I'd hit that part of the drive where music feels like a distraction instead of company. It was just the hum of the tires, the whistle of air around the mirrors, and the low growl of the engine when the interstate tipped upward. The first thing I noticed wasn't the lights. It was the feeling. You know, the sense you get when another car settles in behind you, just at the edge of your mirrors. The way the darkness feels heavier, like someone closed a door you didn't realize was open. That washed over me before anything actually changed. I checked the mirror out of habit. Empty lanes. Then, just as my eyes flicked back to the road, the inside of the car flashed blue and red. They didn't ramp up from a distance the way they usually do when a cruiser comes flying up behind you. They were just there, sudden, full, saturating the interior like someone had thrown a switch. My heart did that sick little double kick. It always does when you see those colors in the glass, even if you know you haven't done anything wrong. I glanced down at the speedometer, at the fuel gauge, at the dash, like the car could tell me what crime it had committed. Then came the siren. One quick whoop, just enough to say yes, you. Not the full wail, not the warbling yelp they use weaving through traffic. A single clipped note that seemed to come from everywhere at once. No mistake. I was being pulled over. There's a script that kicks in then. Signal. Ease onto the shoulder. Find as flat and wide a spot as you can. I did all of that automatically, hands suddenly feeling clumsy on the wheel. The shoulder out there isn't generous. Just that narrow strip of gravel and dirt beyond the white line, then desert dropping away. I rolled to a stop, put the car in park, and kept my hands where every PSA tells you to keep them. High on the wheel, fingers visible, eyes forward. The cruiser rolled in behind me, though rolled doesn't quite do it justice. 1 second, the lights were diffused, bouncing off the rear glass and painting the dash in frantic color. The next, the beams were pinned dead center in the mirror, so bright I could barely see the outline of the vehicle they were attached to. The headlights were on low, pointing straight into my cabin. I tried to pick out details, bar light style, push bumper, side markings, but it was just glare and shadow. No silhouette of a driver, no motion in the darkness between those lights and mine. Here's where I want you to feel this with me, not just hear it. Picture your chest a little too tight, your pulse thudding in your throat. The smell of your own car, fabric, maybe fast food salt, maybe that faint chemical scent from the last oil change. Outside, desert cold pushing in through the vents, tinted with dust and creosote. The faint hiss of passing tires from the other side of the median. And under all of it, this thin, sharp line of wrongness you can't quite name yet. I rolled down my window halfway and turned off the engine. Interior lights still off the way you're supposed to. The siren cut out completely. The lights kept strobing. Normally, you'd hear the door of the cruiser open, the thunk of it closing, footsteps on gravel. None of that came. I sat there, hands on the wheel, counting my own breaths. 1, 2, 3, nothing. 4, 5, still nothing. At maybe the 15-second mark, just when the silence started to feel impossible, there was a tap on the glass beside my head. Not a knock. A tap. 1 knuckle, precise, right at my temple. I jumped, skin buzzing, and turned my head. The window was half down, open to the night air. No one stood beside the door. No shadow, no reflective vest, no hat brim. Just the empty shoulder, the guardrail a few feet away, and beyond it, the dark slope of desert falling away into nothing. "Good evening," a man's voice said. Not from the window. From behind me. From somewhere inside the car that wasn't occupied by anyone but me. I froze. The hairs on my arms went up so fast they hurt. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, with that practiced, neutral tone you hear on dashcam videos. Calm, a little tired, utterly sure of its authority. It sounded not right at my ear, not out by the bumper, but suspended just behind my right shoulder, like someone leaning in from the back seat. "You know why I stopped you tonight?" he asked. My rational brain was doing cartwheels, trying to explain how a voice that crisp could be coming from outside, through glass and wind noise and the hum of the highway. Some kind of PA system, but cruisers project outward. They don't pipe sound into your cabin like a Bluetooth speaker. And there was no distortion. It sounded like he was sitting in the dark back there, close enough that if I reached back, my fingers would brush a uniform sleeve. I didn't turn around. Every instinct I had screamed not to. Instead, I did what scared, polite people do. "No, sir," I managed. My mouth felt dry. I thought I was going the limit. A small pause. I realized I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. Slow. Even. Right in that pocket of space between the driver's seat and the headrest behind it. "You crossed the line," he said. I looked at the white paint on the pavement, solid where it should be solid, dashed where it should be dashed. "The lane line," I asked, because fear makes you stupid. Another pause. This one longer. The lights in the mirror buzzed at the edge of my vision. Red, blue, painting the interior in colors that didn't feel like they could exist in still air. "Between up and down," he said finally. "Between here and gone." If you've ever had somebody say something so out of script that your body reacts before your mind catches up, you know that floating feeling that followed. For a second, it was like hearing words in another language, tone and rhythm without meaning. Then the bottom dropped out of my stomach. This was not the conversation I was supposed to be having. "License and registration," he said. Slowly. My hands moved on their own, one dropping to the center console where my wallet was, the other to the glove box. The overhead lights in the cruiser didn't flicker the way they usually do when an officer shifts their weight or leans in. They stayed unnervingly steady. I flipped the wallet open, fingers stiff, and slid my license out. When I turned slightly to angle it toward the back, I still refused to look all the way around. In my peripheral vision, the back seat was just a dark shape. No outline. No shine off a badge. Just the sense of occupied space. "Left hand," he said. "Hold it up." I obeyed. My arm trembled, my wrist feeling suddenly hollow. For a split second, cool air brushed the tips of my fingers. Not from the vent, not from the window, from behind, as if someone had leaned forward to take the card, breath ghosting across my knuckles. Except nothing left my grip. The license was still pinched between my fingers, edge sharp against my skin. "Got it," he said anyway. You're listening to this and thinking, why didn't you bolt? Why didn't you floor it, call 911, do anything except sit there letting this play out? And you're right. To a calm mind, in a lit room, that's the obvious move. But in that moment, on that shoulder, with that voice in my back seat, and those lights filling the world behind me, everything narrowed to one terrified goal. Do not make it angry. We went through the motions of a traffic stop like that. He asked where I was coming from, where I was headed, whether I'd had anything to drink. His questions were textbook. My answers came out thin and reedy, but they came. The whole time, my license hovered in midair in my own hand, unseen and untouched, while some invisible checklist ticked itself off just behind my ear. "Long drive," he said at one point. "Late hour. People get tired. Cross lines they shouldn't." There was something like amusement buried way down under the flat professionalism. Not humor, just interest. At some point, I couldn't have told you how long, time had gone strange and stretchy. He said, "Look at me." Every cell in my body rebelled. I'd rather keep my eyes forward, sir," I said, and I could hear, underneath my own words, how close I was to crying. "Look at me," he repeated, and the temperature in the car dropped hard enough that my breath plumed in the faint light off the dash. I turned. Slowly, inch by inch, I let my head pivot toward the back seat, eyes tracking along the worn fabric, the faint pattern in the upholstery. For a heartbeat, there was nothing there but shadow. Then the shadow thickened. Just a little. Like air deciding to remember it used to be something else. Two paler points hung where a face might be. Not glowing, not reflective like animal eyes, just slightly less dark than everything around them. That's as far as I got. My body flinched away on its own, snapping my gaze back to the windshield like a rubber band. I realized my hand was shaking so hard the plastic of the license made a tiny chattering noise against my fingernail. "Good," he said quietly. "Most people look longer." He let that hang there for a moment. Out on the interstate, in the far lanes, a semi roared past, its gust rocking my little car. The real world was still moving out there. I was weirdly grateful for the proof. "There've been a lot of you lately," he went on. "Drifting. Between cities. Between exits. Between one thought and the next. Headlights on, hands on the wheel, nobody really home." His tone never changed, but something in it grew heavier. "You know how many don't notice when the shoulder drops away, when the line they cross isn't paint anymore?" I swallowed. The image came too easily. A car like mine, slipping off loose gravel, nosing down into a dark wash. A set of skid marks nobody can quite explain. A state trooper standing at the edge of a ravine at dawn, wondering how late is too late to say they got there in time. "Are you," I started, then stopped, because there was no word that didn't sound insane. "On patrol," he said. "Always." We sat in that for another breath or two. Then he said, brisk again, "I'm not going to cite you tonight. You're going to merge back in, drive with both hands on the wheel, and remember which side of the line you want to be on. Understood?" "Yes, sir," I said. It came out in a rush. The air behind me warmed a fraction, like someone shifting back, giving me space. "When I pull away," he said, "don't look for my taillights. Just go. If you check your mirror and see nothing, keep it that way. The lights in the glass flared once, painfully bright. I had to squint. When my vision cleared, the colors were gone. No red, no blue. Just the empty black curve of I-17 stretching behind me. The faint, honest gleam of distant headlights from real cars in real lanes. I sat there for a full minute, heart hammering, the weight of the silence louder than any siren. My license was still in my hand. No ticket, no citation slip, no boot prints in the dirt outside when I finally cracked the door and stepped out to check. Just my own tire marks, shallow in the gravel, and the echo of a voice that had no car attached to it. Later, at home, with 2 bright kitchen lights and the safe hum of the fridge, I did what you'd expect. I pulled up news stories about I-17, reports of fatal single-vehicle crashes on the Black Canyon stretch, articles about troopers working endless shifts, finding people who drifted off just enough that physics took over. The usual warnings about drowsy driving, about how many lives get lost on that run between Phoenix and the high country every year. Buried in the comments under one of those pieces, I found a line from some other insomniac. "There's a ghost cop on that road. Pulled me over once when I nodded off. No ticket, just a voice in the backseat telling me to wake the hell up." I don't know if what stopped me that night was the same thing. Maybe it was a stress hallucination, my brain scaring me straight. Maybe I dozed for a second on the shoulder and dreamed the whole encounter. But I'll tell you this. Ever since then, if I'm driving alone on a dark interstate and I feel that prickling awareness that someone is right behind me and the lights in my mirror seem to appear without traveling any of the distance in between, I check in with myself. Am I fully here? Are my eyes really open? Are my hands really on the wheel? And if you ever find yourself out there on that climb between Black Canyon City and the rim, late enough that the desert feels like it's emptied out just for you, and those colors fill your car without warning, and a calm voice in the dark asks if you know why you've been stopped, take a breath. Answer honestly. Because there are worse fates on that road than a ticket, and sometimes the thing that pulls you over might be the only reason you don't find out what's waiting at the bottom of the ravine. You ever been somewhere so empty that the only proof you exist is the sound of your own breathing? That's what the Sonoran back roads feel like at 3 in the morning, south of Gila Bend, where the map turns into a suggestion and the desert stops pretending it was ever tamed. For this one, picture yourself in the passenger seat of a white state-issued Tacoma with dust ground into every seam. You can feel the grit on the floor under your boots, smell old coffee and sun-baked plastic, and taste that metallic dryness that only exists in places too far from the sea for the air to remember what moisture feels like. You're riding with me, a wildlife biologist on contract, out checking remote camera traps and telemetry collars on a night I should have written off as a bad idea. The road we were on barely qualified as one. It started life as a ranch track, then got half-heartedly graded by some agency truck in the 80s, then forgotten. 2 ruts, a strip of hardpan between them, and on either side, low creosote, cholla, saguaros standing like sentries against a sky spilled with stars. No fences this far out, no porch lights. Just the faint orange bruise on the horizon where Phoenix was sleeping a lifetime away. I'd switched off the stereo an hour earlier. Out here, even music feels like litter. All I had was the crunch of tires on gravel and the periodic ping of telemetry from a collared mountain lion I'd been tracking for months. You know those little satellite emergency beacons hikers carry now, bright plastic bricks with one job, scream at the sky if something goes wrong. I had one clipped to the dash, standard issue for field crews working this far off-grid. It had been inert all night, a silent comfort. Then, just past a dry wash that the maps optimistically labeled as a seasonal river, it chirped. Not a low battery whine, not a test signal. A sharp, insistent triple beep That meant it was picking up a distress call nearby. I glanced at the unit. A red LED was blinking steadily. The tiny screen, no bigger than a thumb, showed a coordinate readout and a distance estimate. 1/2 kilometer, bearing north-northwest. For a second, my brain filed that under good news. Someone out here had hit their SOS, and I was the closest body with a motor. Then the part of me that actually knows this system caught up. Our network doesn't just tell you distance. It tells you exactly how far and in what direction the distress is, based on satellite triangulation. The numbers on the screen weren't changing as I drove. The distance readout, 0.0 kilometers. The coordinate lines, identical to the ones on my handheld GPS. The beacon was pinging from my exact location. There's a special kind of cold that isn't about temperature. It's the one that starts in your spine and radiates outward. Like your nervous system just realized it missed a memo. I eased the truck to a stop in the middle of the track, engine idling, and picked up the beacon. It kept chirping, unbothered by being unplugged from its mount. I cycled the display. Same coordinates, same proximate distress warning. Yeah, very funny, I muttered to no one. To you, maybe, sitting here, after the fact. Glitch in the network. I powered the unit off. The LED died. The desert rushed in, wind against the mirror, a coyote yipping somewhere far to the east, the soft tick of the exhaust cooling. Then, from the cup holder came the chirp again. The screen blinked awake on its own. 0.0 kilometers. Same coordinates. Same little red icon, pulsing where I should have been on the map. You might be thinking software bug, bad firmware, some engineer in a climate-controlled office forgetting to test their code in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to think that too. So I did what field people always do when technology misbehaves. I cross-checked it against something dumber. I grabbed my handheld GPS, the one that had been right about everything from misplaced guzzlers to misplotted tanks all season, and watched it find satellites, settle, and spit out its best guess. The numbers matched the beacon exactly. Whoever was in distress, according to 2 independent systems and 3 separate satellites, was standing precisely where I was. I stepped out of the truck. The cold hit instantly, dry and clean, stealing the last of the cab's stale warmth from my clothes. The stars overhead looked close enough to bruise your knuckles on. The only light was my dome lamp and the faint wash of my headlights on a stand of ocotillo. I turned in a slow circle, beacon in one hand, GPS in the other. Red LED blinking, green backlight glowing. No footprints in the dust that weren't mine. No crashed ATV, no hiker slumped against a rock, no overturned truck in a draw. Just the endless, indifferent sprawl of the Sonoran. "Hello?" I called, because that's what you do, even when you know how stupid it is. My voice sounded wrong, too loud in the stillness. It didn't echo. It just went out and got eaten by the open space. The beacon chirped again. This time the screen had a new line, Signal Origin ID 7C 1409. That meant this wasn't a random burst of noise. It was tied to a registered device. Every PLB has a unique ID, logged when it's sold or assigned. If this one was in our system, I'd be able to cross-reference it later, figure out whose emergency I'd stumbled over. I thumbed through my mental Rolodex of numbers. They all blur when you've seen enough of them, but that prefix scratched at something in the back of my head. Old case files. An incident report from years ago that got passed around the office as a cautionary tale. A solo hiker, lost in a freak heat wave when their ride bailed early. Beacon triggered too late. By the time rescue got there, the only thing left working was the device itself, still sending its coordinates into the sky long after the person it belonged to stopped needing them. I turned the unit over. Scratches. A gouge where it had obviously hit rock. This wasn't my assigned beacon. Mine was still in its cradle on the dash, quietly showing, "Okay." I was holding someone else's. Same make, same model, same faded high-vis shell, but with a thin crack along the casing like it had been out here longer than I had. You're close enough now that I can feel you react when I say this next part. I do not remember picking it up. I'd clipped mine to the dash at the start of the night and never touched it. It was still there when I checked. Green LED solid, my own ID number on the back like it should be. But in my hand was another one, blinking distress, insisting it was broadcasting from exactly where I stood. I could have left then. Tossed it in the passenger seat, driven back to the main road, radioed it in as found equipment, let some other department chase the paper trail. Instead, I did the thing that still wakes me up some nights. I hit the info button, brought up the last log distress event, and told the unit to navigate to it. The arrow on the display spun once, searching for north, then settled. Bearing 000 degrees. Distance 0.2 kWh. North of me was nothing, according to the last satellite image I'd seen. A shallow wash, a low rise, then miles of low desert until the next ranch road. No towers, no tanks, no marked trails. Just the kind of terrain where people disappear and the desert covers its work in a season. I popped the glove box, grabbed my headlamp, slung my radio on a clip, and told myself this was my job. If there was even a 1% chance someone was out there and alive, I had to check. We walked, you and I, because that's how it feels when I replay it. The truck's headlights shrank behind us, then disappeared as we dropped into the wash. Sand shifted under my boots, dry and squeaky. The beacon's arrow ticked, correcting tiny deviations, the distance readout counting down. 0:18 to 00:16, 0:14. My own breath sounded too loud in my ears. The beam of my headlamp carved a narrow tunnel through creosote and prickly pear, every shadow a potential shape until it wasn't. About 100 meters out, the air changed. It wasn't a smell exactly, but the absence of one. Desert nights have their own scent, dry earth, plant oils, the faint tang of whatever's been passing through. This felt like stepping into a pocket that had been sealed off. The wind died. The rustle of small things in the brush cut out. Under my boots, the ground went from sandy to oddly firm, like hard-packed clay that had been baked and rebaked. The beacon read 0.02 kilometer. The arrow pointed straight ahead, unwavering. My headlamp picked out a scatter of rocks, a depression in the earth, and then something that didn't match anything around it. A perfectly circular patch of bare soil about 2 meters across, free of vegetation, free of stones, nothing but fine, pale dust, sifted smooth, as if someone had poured it through a sieve. The distance read 0.00 kilometers. I stopped at the edge of the circle. Every instinct I had screamed not to step into it. Not because I thought it would swallow me cartoon style, but because it felt occupied. The hair on my arms rose. My heart was going too fast for how little I'd exerted myself. The beacon in my hand buzzed once, a haptic nudge I'd never felt it give before, and the screen flicked from coordinates to a single line of text. Time since initial signal. 19 years, 3 months, 6 days. You ever have your sense of time bend in on itself? 1 second you're firmly rooted in your own present. The next you're aware of all the other nows stacked up in the same space. I pictured a man, because in the story we'd passed around, it had been a man, stumbling into this exact spot 2 decades earlier, sun high and merciless instead of stars. I pictured him thumb this same kind of beacon with cracked, swollen fingers. I pictured him watch the little red LED blink, knowing help was 30 miles and 3 hours and 1,000 bad decisions away. The radio on my shoulder hissed, not the usual static burst when dispatch keys in, a long, low exhale of white noise that climbed into a sound like wind over a microphone. Then, under it, so faint I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, a voice. Anyone on this? Copy. Coordinates. The words were chewed by interference, chopped into pieces, but the cadence, That desperate, clipped attempt at calm was unmistakable. Field 12, say again. I lifted the handset. My own voice shook. Dispatch, you're not coming through. Silence. Then the white noise again, but different this time. Layered. If you've ever listened to an old answering machine tape that's been recorded over too many times, you know the effect. Voices under voices. Scraps of phrases bleeding through each other. Lost visual. 30 hours. Waters. Think I missed the turn at the cattle guard. Tell my wife I yanked the volume down. The desert rushed back in, leaving my ears ringing. The beacon's display had changed again. Now it wasn't showing numbers at all. Just a slow, pulsing icon at the center of the blank map, like a heartbeat rendered in pixels. I don't know how long I stood there at the edge of that circle, toes just shy of the line where normal desert gave way to that unnervingly smooth dust. Long enough for my legs to start to ache. Long enough for the night to feel like it was leaning in. A rational person would have tossed the thing on the ground, turned around, and never spoken of it again. A better person might have stepped forward, tried to see if the earth held bones that needed to be brought home. I didn't either. I took one cautious step back. The beacon's LED went from red to green. I stared at it. The little distress icon winked off. The screen reverted to standby. Battery 78%. GPS locked. No active alerts. It was as if, in that single retreating motion, I'd satisfied something. Checked a box. Acknowledged receipt of a message that had been waiting 19 years for someone to arrive. On the walk back to the truck, the desert reclaimed its sounds bit by bit. First the wind, sliding cold fingers across my neck, then the tiny scrapes and twitches of nocturnal life, resuming whatever it had been doing before I disturbed it. A cactus wren scolded once from a cholla, oddly out of place in the dark. My boots found their rhythm again. The truck looked wrong when it finally appeared in the beam of my headlamp. Too bright, too clean, like an object from a different world dropped into this one as a joke. Inside, with the doors shut and the engine running and the dash lights doing their bland, comforting glow, it was tempting to file the whole thing under desert weirdness and lock it in a drawer in my head. I set the beacon back in its cradle, my assigned one, green LED, my own ID on the back. The other unit, the cracked one, the one with 19 years of screaming baked into its memory, I set on the passenger seat between us, where you'd be if you were really here. It didn't make another sound the whole drive back to pavement. Here's the part that tried the hardest to tear a hole in my comfortable little bubble of disbelief. When I got back to the office and ran the ID through our database, it pinged a closed case file. Same prefix I'd half remembered, same hiker, same coordinates for the recovery site, give or take the margin of error on old GPS units. The note said the beacon had been found with the body, damaged, non-functional, logged into evidence, eventually destroyed. I turned the unit over in my hands, thumb tracing the same gouge that the report mentioned in passing. Same color, same model, same little scuff where a sticker had been half peeled off. Impossible, someone muttered behind me when I laid the file and the device side by side. It might have been me. You can decide, sitting wherever you are with this voice in your ear, whether you think the desert gave me a copy, or a memory, or just enough of a hallucination to make me more careful. All I know is that I've never trusted those 0.0 kilometer readings the same way since. When a distress signal says it's coming from exactly where I'm standing, I check the circle around my boots twice. I listen for voices in the radio static that have no business still being on the line. And if you ever find yourself far out on a Sonoran back road, no fences, no lights, just saguaros and stars and the soft hiss of gravel under your tires, and a little plastic brick on your dash suddenly insists that someone right where you are is in trouble, do me a favor. Stop. Step out. Look at the ground carefully before you go charging off to play rescuer, because some calls out here are fresh and you might save a life. Some have been bouncing between Earth and satellite for decades, waiting for anyone to finally show up. Those ones don't want saving. They want to be heard, and the desert does not easily let go of the things it has already claimed. You ever notice how some stretches of road feel like they're sitting on top of something older, and you only really sense it when the lights around you go away? That's what the I-40 bridge over Canyon Diablo feels like at night. Just a few miles of ordinary interstate between Winslow and Flagstaff, but with a drop beneath it that has seen more than the asphalt above will ever admit. For this one, come sit in the driver's seat with me. Feel your hands on the wheel, the low vibration of the tires over concrete joints, the faint rattle of loose change in the cup holder. Outside the glass, nothing but black desert, a few red taillights way ahead, a few white headlights way behind, and the knowledge that, somewhere out there in the dark off to your right, the ruins of a town once called Canyon Diablo are still crumbling next to a canyon that's been swallowing bad decisions for over a century. I was coming east from Flagstaff, late enough that most of the sane traffic had already peeled off into motels. Winslow was 30 miles ahead. I told myself I'd stop there, grab a room, finish the push home in the morning. You know how that goes. The coffee at the last gas station had been just good enough to make me cocky. The dash said 12:31 a.m. The road conditions were clear, and the line of my headlights felt like a tunnel I could stay inside forever if I just kept breathing and didn't think too much about how tired I actually was. If you've driven that stretch, you know it has a rhythm. Long, gentle descents and climbs, distant glow from little towns, billboards for meteor craters and trading posts, then long gaps of nothing. The radio had given up pulling in anything but static and late-night preachers, so it was just the hum of the engine and the white lines flicking through the bottom of the windshield like an old film reel. I remember glancing at a green sign that flashed Canyon Diablo with an exit number and thinking vaguely, oh right, that place with the ghost town, before the sign slid behind us into the dark. The bridge didn't announce itself. There's no big steel arch to warn you you're about to cross something famous. Just concrete walls on either side of the road that rise a little higher than normal, the way they do over deep cuts, and a subtle change in the way the air sounds around the car. You hear it first as a hollow undernote to your tires, a less solid rumble, like the road's skin has thinned. I was halfway across before any part of my brain bothered to name it as a bridge at all. Then the radio turned itself on. 1 second, there was nothing but the low rush of road noise. The next, the speakers popped and flooded the car with a crackling wash of sound. Brass instruments, people shouting, a whistle, the clatter of wheels on rails. It was so sudden and so loud that my hands jerked on the wheel. I looked down at the console expecting to see the display lit up on some random FM frequency. It was dark. The volume knob sat exactly where I'd left it. The little power icon was off. Out of the corner of my eye, the concrete wall of the bridge flashed past, gray in the headlights. The sound in the cabin sharpened into something disturbingly specific. A conductor's voice called out in a cadence I didn't recognize, too fast and too clipped to be modern. All aboard, Flagstaff, Winslow, Gallup, Albuquerque. A bell clanged, bright and insistent. Under it all, a deeper roar built, the kind you feel more in your chest than in your ears, the vibration of a heavy train starting to move. I told myself it was bleed over from a nearby station, some weird atmospheric quirk bouncing a late-night broadcast from God knows where into my speakers. Then the car shuddered. Not from the wind, not from a gust of air off a passing semi. This was a vertical jolt, like someone had slapped the undercarriage from below. My teeth clicked together. The steering wheel twitched in my hands. For an instant, the headlights pointed fractionally down, and in that narrow slice of concrete guard wall, I saw something painted there in faded black letters. Santa Fe, old railroad font, not on my side of the barrier, on a surface that should have been facing empty air and canyon. I did the one thing you're not supposed to do on a bridge at night in the middle of nowhere. I took my foot off the gas without thinking about who might be behind me. The car decelerated a little. The sound in the cabin didn't. The train noise grew louder, closer, like whatever was making it had matched my speed and was pacing me from somewhere I couldn't see. You're just tired, I told you, or myself, or whatever thin line of sanity was still in the front seat. It's the way the concrete's echoing. The horn hit, not a car horn. A locomotive's, long, low, and full, spraying every nerve in my body with cold adrenaline. It blared, not from outside, but from everywhere at once, the way thunder sounds when it's directly overhead. My chest vibrated with it. The rear-view mirror buzzed. For a split second, the windshield seemed to show more than the empty lane ahead. A smear of orange light, the ghost of a plume, a darker mass moving perfectly in sync with us, down in the canyon where no train has run in decades. You shifted in your seat just then, didn't you? That tiny adjustment people make when fight or flight kicks at the inside of the ribs. That's exactly what my body did behind the wheel. Every part of me wanted to brake hard, to get off the bridge as fast as possible. But some older instinct recognized how bad an idea that was. I kept us moving, steady, hands welded at 10 and 2. The speedometer trembled around 68. It felt like we were drifting in slow motion over something bottomless. The horn cut off mid-note. In its absence, the cabin felt weirdly overfilled, like the air had turned to gel and every movement was a push. The radio crackled again, and for half a second, under the hiss, I heard a human voice, thin and far away. God help. Then nothing. Just the engine. Just the tires. Just my own breath, ragged and too loud. You ever feel that unnatural quiet after a loud sound, where the world seems to be waiting to see what you'll do next? That's what the rest of the crossing felt like. My peripheral vision was full of phantom motion. Every shadow that flickered on the concrete wall beside us wanted to be a line of boxcars running the opposite direction. I kept catching almost faces in the glass. A woman's profile in an old hat. A man in a brimmed cap, the flat front of a steam engine with its big round eye. Each time I turned my head to look straight at them, there was only my own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, wearing an expression I didn't recognize as my own. I don't know exactly when we cleared the canyon. There was no obvious moment where the bridge ended and solid ground began. The concrete walls just sank back down to normal guardrail height. The road opened out. The subtle hollowness under the tires smoothed into ordinary highway resonance. The radio snapped off with an audible click that shook me almost as much as when it had come alive. For a mile or two, I just drove. White knuckles, forward stare, the way you do after you've swerved around an elk or hydroplaned and somehow not died. The urge to pull over and throw up hit me in a wave. So did the equally strong urge not to stop anywhere near there. When I finally forced myself to look at the clock, the digital readout said 12:32 a.m., 1 minute past when I'd first noticed the sign for Canyon Diablo. That wasn't possible. There's no way everything that had just happened, radio freakout, physical jolt, train noise, phantom horn, had all taken place in 60 seconds. My body felt like it had been locked in that stretch of road for at least 10 minutes, maybe more. I made Winslow on autopilot, took the first motel I saw, and only realized how bad I was shaking when I tried to hand over my card at the desk and dropped it twice. The clerk, college kid, didn't comment. Maybe he'd seen worse. Maybe this stretch of I-40 produces a lot of people with eyes that can't quite focus on the present yet. You can probably guess what I did in that generic room with its generic art and hum of the ice machine through the wall. I pulled out my phone and searched. Canyon Diablo ghost stories, train wrecks, old bridge myths. What came back was a mess of half-remembered history and legend. The boomtown on the edge of the canyon so violent, newspapers called it meaner than Tombstone. The stories of shootouts on Hell Street. The railroad bridge project that stalled for so long, the workers built a whole lawless camp while they waited. The mention, always the same, in every version, that when the first train finally crossed the finished span, it did so to the cheering of crowds on both sides and the nervous whisper of people who weren't sure you should tempt a place with that name by daring it with that much steel. Buried in one longer article, there was a paragraph about an accident I'd never heard of. Not a spectacular headline-grabbing disaster, no famous wreck for the history books, but a smaller one, almost a footnote. Freight consist, early 1900s, heavy storm, rock slide just west of the canyon. The engine managed to stop before the damaged section, but a portion of the train behind it didn't. Several cars jackknifed and went over the edge. Crew injured, one man missing, body never recovered. Locals saying they heard the horn for hours after the crash had supposedly been over, echoing up from the ravine, long and low and wrong. Maybe that's all it was. Old stories worming into my tired brain, making pattern out of noise. Maybe there's some quirk of the geology there that bounces AM radio in freakish ways you only notice at night. Maybe the hollowness under the bridge, the Santa Fe lettering my headlights picked out, the sense of a mass moving in lockstep under my wheels. Maybe those were all separate, explainable things my fear braided together into one ghost train I could tell you about later. Or maybe, just once, for one tired driver on his way to a cheap room and a too-late sleep, the past reached up out of that canyon and ran alongside the present for the span of a breath. Here's the part I want you to actually carry with you if you ever find yourself on that run at night. When you see the Canyon Diablo sign, when the guard walls on either side of you creep just a little higher, when the desert drops away into a dark that feels thicker than the miles around it, pay attention to the way your car sounds, to the feel of the wheel in your hands, to the silence between stations on your radio. If, just for a moment, the noise in your cabin changes, if you hear a horn that doesn't belong to any vehicle you can see, if you feel a shudder from below that doesn't match the pavement, if voices crackle through speakers you know are off, keep your eyes on the road, keep your speed steady. Let whatever is pacing you have its minute. Don't stop on the bridge. Don't lean over the rail to see if you can hear it. Whatever's still running laps down there has had a very long time to get used to things falling. And I have a feeling that some echoes, once they notice you, would be very happy to make you part of the pattern.